and thank you all.
So, Katie, are we close to live?
Mr. Chairman, we're live.
All right. Well, I'd like to start by welcoming everybody to our multi-committee working group of that we've been established by Management Council to help us look at the issue of electricity taxation in Wyoming. Katie, just so we make sure we know who's on the call and for everybody else and who might be in the room, would you mind going through the list? And I can see the edge of Senator Burkhart. He's there he is. You're right behind the pillar too when the camera comes in the other direction. But would you mind maybe kind of doing a roll call, Katie? Because I'm not sure. We may be missing one person if we have both alternates here. But anyway, go ahead.
Certainly, Mr. Chairman. This is roll call for the Electricity Taxation Subcommittee for May 22nd, 2024. Chairman Case.
Present.
Senator Beitman.
Here.
Senator Rothfuss.
Here.
Representative Burkhart.
Here.
Representative Harshman.
Here.
Representative Wiley.
Here.
And the alternate, Representative J.T. Larson.
Here.
Perfect. Looks like everybody's here, and thank you so much. I know it was difficult. We'll try to dive right into it and keep it short. As you all know, this is a working group that was established under the auspices of the Management Council. It started with a proposal that came out of the Corporations Committee relating to requesting some money to fund the issue of electricity taxation and the obstacles there. And it was based on following up on 3 bills that we had in the last session and previous legislation and discussions in the area. Management Council saw fit to put some money into the request. They actually gave more than we asked for, or more than was in the initial request, and suggested that it be a multi-committee effort. And so the organization of 2 members from each of corporations, revenue, and minerals is how we came about. We're very fortunate that the House Minerals Chairman, he's got a huge lift this year with all his meetings, but he's here in person today. But we also have an alternate that would fill in for him when necessary. And I appreciate that Representative Larson is here listening in. I was thinking he wasn't going to be here today, so I hope it's good news that you are here today, and welcome. Our budget for the meeting series and the hiring of consultants is a total of $50,000. We'd originally requested 30, and Management Council decided that 20 more would be appropriate. It's also designed to pay for housekeeping of the committee, so that would be the committee costs as well, including travel if we were to so do so. So our total budget is $50,000. Basically, the way the members were selected is we let each chairman of each house and in the respective committee select the nominee. And that's Representative Olson selected Rep. Wiley to be our member from corporations on the House side. And so it was Senator Dockstader who nominated Senator Rothfuss on the Senate mineral side. So that's how we all got there. And I appreciate that we have so many chairmen and so many people, because we've all looked at the issue of electricity and electricity taxation from different angles. And this way we can kind of all be on the same page, maybe come up with a plan to move forward that'd be good for Wyoming. The current plan is that we would take it back to corporations. If we actually had a bill draft at the end of this, that is not, I don't think, set in stone. It could go to any one of our committees if that were more appropriate, or if there were more than one bill. So with that, I just might give a brief overview of the electricity landscape in Wyoming. As we all know, it's changing every day. And it's vastly different than it was 20 years ago. The forms of generation are changing. The makeup of the different types of generation, you can witness that change as we go forward. You can also witness that we're selling less coal, and that the power plants that remain, most of them have they're amazing plants, but most of them have a ending date when they're no longer going to have a permit. And either that's going to change at the federal level or they are going to go away at some point, which has great implications for a vast amount of revenues that we've gotten off of electricity. And when people don't understand that our coal is only burned to produce electricity. There's no other use for Wyoming coal. Now, there's one small exception, a little bit of metallurgical coal that comes out of mines in a mine in southwest Wyoming. But by and large, the vast amounts, Powder River Basin coal, is only used for thermal generation. And we're down by more than half from the high points of when that coal happened. I hope that coal has very long run and continues to do wonderful things and fund our schools and our roads and everything as we go forward. But certainly there is some writing on the wall. But that coal, customers who purchased electricity paid for that, paid those severance taxes and bought that coal. So, and indeed, we've had a very significant electricity tax for as long as we've had a coal severance tax. And I think that's an important piece to keep in mind, and that we were able to export the burden of that tax to power plants in Illinois, Ohio, Texas, and many of which are still running today. A side note is that the coal-fired power plants that are out there are all running less than they did a decade ago. And so they might still be permitted, still be very reliable, but when plentiful renewable energy is available, it displaces the output of those plants because it's basically free. In fact, sometimes on the markets, the owners of those facilities are willing to sell their electricity at a negative price. And that's really an astounding thing. But one of the reasons is that for each unit of electricity that's produced, they receive a production tax credit from the federal government, which is $27.50, I believe, a megawatt. So that's pretty significant reason to run a plant, even if it's not cost effective in a pure marginal cost of generation thought. So as we see our electricity exports in Wyoming have actually been dropping, but they've been dropping mostly because our coal plants are running less, our baseload power. But we have seen an uptake in renewable projects. The largest one in North America will be the Anschutz project in Carbon County. There are other places that other projects, big solar projects. We have a large Canadian firm is building a project south of Cheyenne. So we will see things we go forward. And I see that we have one participant that raised their hand, but I'd like to have public comment later if we could. So prefer that. So anyway, that's a little bit of the landscape as we change. We see the mix changing. One thing that does seem to be clear is that Wyoming will be a significant place where electricity can be produced, especially now via renewables, for really the long-term future. And if you think about these projects that are being built, the true costs of the projects are not necessarily the generators that you see or the solar panels that you can actually visualize. A lot of it has to do with the real estate, with the permitting, and with the transmission lines that have been established that anchor that project. That actually costs more. The permitting is tortuous. I'm sure we're going to hear from that. And that actually is more cost per se than the actual physical facilities. And even though the physical facilities will wear out, those other costs that have made that a good site will continue to be a benefit to the next generation of renewables to be built on that site. So I think we would be mistaken to think that this is a short-term play, that renewables are going to be at 10 years on the landscape and they'll be gone. No, it's more likely they're going to be 50 plus years. And mainly because we will have a need to generate electricity. It'll need to be partnered with other sources of electricity or storage mechanisms, but the need for electrons gathered from wind or solar will be very, very key. That's my little bit about the landscape that we're facing as we move forward. You can just look at the number of projects that are in the works and the rapid increase in projects that we've had in just the past couple of years. So we don't tax these projects very much. We do have a wind tax of $1 per megawatt hour. We have so they pay the same level of sales and property taxes that other facilities pay. But in terms of who pays what in generating electricity, of course, we understand that the fossil fuel industry pays a significant amount of our taxes in Wyoming. So that's kind of our nutshell, is that this electricity landscape is changing and we need to figure out how it will fit into our tax structure as we go forward, especially recognizing that these are not benign things for Wyoming. They're very significant users of landscape. They change the character of our state. They have implications for migratory animals and other things. So, they're a great clean industry and they're doing their part for global warming. So those are good things, but there are plus and minuses. With that, I might have all I have for the kind of the preliminary landscape changing. If anybody has anything they'd like to add to that, please do. This committee's work is related to, we have a timeline that goes until the end of the year. And the idea of our time constraint would be to come up with some information that can be used potentially for legislation that could be part of the next session. Realizing that this committee does not have the ability to introduce a bill ourselves. So it would have to go to another primary committee to be considered in that committee, which would take some time, and then go on into the next session. So our timeline, I wouldn't say that it's hard and fast, but we would certainly need to wrap something up into the fall to be able to get it to another committee for them to consider. Any comment on that? What I thought we might do next is to review the bills that we had in 2024. And Mr. Anderson is here to discuss those bills. If that's appropriate, let's do that next.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, Josh Anderson, LSO. So as you noted at the top, there were 3 bills this last session. Can you hear me, Mr. Chairman?
Certainly can.
Sorry. There were 3 bills, all kind of related or similar that resulted in this discussion when we had our interim topic meeting this year. So just going real quickly through those. The first one we had listed was Senate File 85, the title of the repeal of sales tax on electricity. That bill actually wasn't a full repeal, but it created an exemption for sales of electricity, and only to the extent that there was an equivalent alternative excise tax imposed on the production of electricity, which was defined to be an excise tax of not less than 3.5% on the annual gross energy earnings from energy produced in Wyoming, which then, of course, was related to House Bill 147. That bill titled Electrical Generation Tax. This was modeled a lot on the existing wind energy tax. And just to go briefly through the bill, Mr. Chairman, the imposition of the tax is, again, on production of energy as calculated by annual gross energy earnings from energy produced in Wyoming at a rate of 3.5%. There are some exemptions for facilities owned by federal government or the state, as well as energy produced for personal use. The reports on this were both reports of gross energy earnings as well as sales of electricity in Wyoming, and that is primarily to calculate the distribution, as the distribution section would be largely based on, or to try to make everyone whole based on the sales tax from that other bill, Senate File 85, that would have gotten rid of the sales tax on electricity. A lot of this language is fairly standard as far as the enforcement provisions. Excuse me, Mr. Chairman. One of the big things that this bill did is on page 8, and under the remedies, there's a credit in this bill for all excise sales, use, severance, and ad valorem taxes paid in the tax year by that same taxpayer. There's also a credit equal to the amount of minerals, of the tax paid on the minerals used in the production of that electricity. And then, as noted before, the distribution provisions largely mirror the sales tax distribution and are calculated based on as if the sales tax was still in place. Any amount in excess of that would go to the general fund. And that's that bill. Very briefly, Mr. Chairman. And then finally, House Bill 200. This was an alternative approach, very similar. If you look at the bills side by side, you'll see they look a fair amount different, and that's largely because that last bill, House Bill 147, was used a lot of the language from the wind tax statute, whereas House Bill 200 was based on the sales tax provisions. And so it mirrored a lot of those provisions, which are somewhat different. So you'll see there's a big section on page 3 as far as confidentiality of reports, and that's all comes straight out of the sales tax chapter. Some big differences between the two bills. House Bill 200, the tax is calculated somewhat differently, and rather than on the annual gross energy production, it's based on the sales price. There are kind of 3 different taxable events in the bill on page 6. There's the purchaser price of electricity generated in the state from any fuel source or resource. There's the purchaser sales price from the sale of electricity sold or generated in the state, regardless of the site of generation or the fuel source or resources used. Or there's also a tax on the price of electricity that an electric public utility located in Wyoming is paid to accept and take for electricity that is imported into Wyoming. So a little different way to do the tax bill. Calculate the tax and between the two bills. Also, another major difference between the two bills, Mr. Chairman, is that, well, first, the rate is different. It was a rate of 2.25% on that sales price. And then this bill did not have the provision providing a credit for other taxes paid by that same taxpayer or for the mineral. And then the distribution is a little different in this bill. It's similar to the sales tax distribution, but it's just distributed primarily based on population, 69% to the state, and then the remainder county by county, based largely on population. And then this bill did repeal the sales tax on electricity, sales and use tax on electricity, and also repealed the wind tax and the nuclear tax. So those are briefly the bills, Mr. Chairman. I'd take any questions.
You bet. Any questions for Josh? And then I would like to also, at some point, let Representative Burkhart, Chairman Burkhart, talk about his bill as well. That was the latter bill. So Senator Rothfuss, go ahead.
Chairman, Josh, you noted that the taxes on wind and nuclear were repealed in House Bill 200. I assume they were also repealed in 147. Is that accurate?
Josh.
Mr. Chairman, I do not believe 147 repealed those taxes. It would, because of that credit provision, it wouldn't matter whether those were repealed or not, because they would get a credit for those taxes. But the bill did not by itself repeal those.
Mr. Chairman, follow up.
Go ahead.
Was there a reason for that? I mean, if it's dollar for dollar credit, leaving, for example, the wind power generation on the books where the sale is being taxed on a generation credit basis, seems fully redundant. So I guess I'm surprised that that repealer wouldn't be there, even if it's accounted for in the math.
Mr. Chairman, yeah,
Josh,
we did.
I
Go ahead, Mr. Chairman.
that's my fault, basically. So I worked on the first two bills, and Chairman Burkhart developed the latter bill. And you're exactly right, Senator. It certainly, the idea is that those taxes would be fully credits, or we could repeal them. It was just seemed messier to try to figure out how to repeal them, and worry that that might get hijacked in the past session and end up with a repeal of something we didn't want to repeal because we didn't have a replacement. But I think your logic is right on. The better way would be to get rid of all the other specific electricity taxes and just have one overwhelming one that would be technology neutral. Josh, is that okay with you? And then to Senator Rothfuss for follow-up. We okay, Josh?
Yeah, yes, sir, Mr. Chairman.
All right, Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I'm also curious about how the optional cents are handled, where they're the local distributions, whether the credit would be available for those as well, even though I'm assuming we're not canceling those. Or perhaps we are, but that would then be mathematically awkward. It was my understanding that we were compensating for the state share of sales and use tax and leaving local effectively in place, but I don't know if it makes that clear for the credit side of the equation. So how exactly does that work? And 147 is what that's specific to. I don't think that question's relevant necessarily for 200.
Correct, Mr. Chairman. So that's in the distribution section. And so it does just say the way that is currently in 147 would be the amount of the proceeds equal to the amount of taxes that would be due if the sales tax of electricity was in place. So it doesn't specifically address either way whether that would be including the optional pennies or not.
And Senator Rothfuss and others, my thinking was that we would reimburse local governments for their optional taxes. They're not going to input in optional taxes or not put in optional taxes based on the electricity tax part. So I don't see that they could game the system. But the idea is, I didn't think we wanted local governments to stand up and say, don't do this. You're taking our revenues away from us. And, and maybe we will want to do that and change the shares and all that. But I tried to find a bill that local government could support because they would not lose any revenue over this. And so that the optional sales tax would be calculated and paid for out of the proceeds of the whatever the electricity tax is, just like it had not been repealed. And there's a reason we can do that, because we do know what the electricity sales are in each jurisdiction in Wyoming, and we would continue to know that because we require the taxpayers to report it. It's a little different than the food tax situation, which I think people have tried to draw the analogy, say, well, you're backfilling and, look what happened with the food tax. Well, we would know the amount of sales of electricity, so we can backfill should that be the policy choice of the state. So I hope that's helpful.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, and it is helpful to understand that the one consideration, and I absolutely agree that holding harmless for those taxes is the appropriate approach, but the basis for that calculation does mean that from the state's perspective, since we're making up for example, in a 6-cent location, we're making up for a 6-cent sales tax. Where in a 4% location, we're making up for a 4-cent sales tax. There's actually a cost differential on that state makeup portion, depending on where it's at. And I guess the other way to possibly think about it, and I'm not saying this is the right way, I'm just saying the alternative would be to leave in place the optional sales tax components. I don't know whether that would then be challenging to collect or not, but basically having the credit on the state side, the 4 cents, and leaving local sales and use tax unaffected, rather than crediting, would be the alternative possibility. Just for consideration. I don't know which is the better approach, but
Yeah, I think it's an excellent point, and we'll be able to address that. I'm sure we have the mechanism to not collect the 4 cents, but to allow the others to go. I'm sure we could do that. So thank you for that. Anybody else on this? And then I thought we would let Chairman Burkhart, if he wanted to talk about House Bill 200 at all, this would be a good time.
Excuse me. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I think Josh covered House Bill 200 very adequately. It replaces the sales tax with a flat generation tax based on the sales price of electricity. The division of that tax then, and that's the reason for the length of the bill, is pretty much identical to sales tax. So you'd cover all those sales tax issues. And that at the 2.25%, actually the towns and counties, they actually make more money. So that was that, and it just really pretty much eliminated all other taxes on electricity, the $1 a megawatt wind tax, the potential $5 a megawatt on nuclear, and applied it equally to every generation source, regardless of what the source is, level across the board. So that's kind of the bill in a nutshell. The handling of the sales tax was a little different in that sales tax was removed from the definition of tangible property, so that there's no reason for an exemption. It actually would not even exist on the tax statutes anymore, a tax on generated electricity. So that's where it was. In preparing the bill, the County Commissioners Association participated, Taxpayers Association participated, and that. Now, that doesn't mean that bill doesn't have some issues that need to be worked out, and one being that tangible property issue and how it affects companies that use electricity into the final product. They would no longer get an exemption, and that's something that needs to be addressed. The other thing is the point of sale is where the electricity is valued. And again, I think that needs to be addressed to ensure that we are not charging anyone a different rate based on where the sale price is. For example, if it's in, central Wyoming, that's one thing. if they transmit it and the sale isn't made until it's across the state line, that's another thing, and we need to address those issues. But I think Mr. Anderson covered it very well on the kind of the high-level view of that bill. Most of it was in the various details. So if there are any questions, glad to answer them.
Let's find out. Thank you very much, Representative. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Chairman Burkhart, I am curious about the last statement that you were saying where we want to work out and the location aspect of it. And I guess I use an example, if a kilowatt hour of Wyoming generated power is sold in one location at, we'll say 10 cents for that kilowatt hour because there's a particular demand at that time, and then in Wyoming, a neighboring kilowatt hour that is consumed in Wyoming is sold for 6 cents per kilowatt hour at that particular time. Is your intent to tax at those values? So the 10-cent kilowatt hour is taxed on the 10 cents and the 6 is taxed at 6? Or were you just suggesting that somehow that should be unified and homogenized?
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
So, thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Rothfuss, the intent was on the actual sales price. Normally for a residential customer, the sales price is the same throughout the certificated territory. And that for industrial customers, the sales price is often a negotiated price. So it would be on that actual price. And if there's a price difference, yes, then there would be a difference in the tax. The tax was on sales. For example, one hardware store may sell an electric drill for $100. Another one may sell it for $90. And when we buy those, depending on the store, we pay the appropriate 6% or 4% tax. So that was the intent, that it was on the sales price, which in the long run may cause some difficulties depending on where the sale takes place, what the agreement is. Tried to define it as the first interconnect to the distribution center. That might also not work well, just due to the way those interconnects work. So that was the idea there, that you paid on the negotiated price, and then if it's between utilities, again, that's a different negotiated price, and that was not addressed in the bill. If one utility sells to another, how that price is valued and at what point. In the long run, ultimately, the consumer, the ratepayer, pays for the taxes just as they do on sales tax right now. So that was the intent.
Senator Rothfuss.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. Thank you for that explanation, Chairman Burkhart. A couple of concerns there. One is, if you have a transaction finalizing the price, so the first wholesale sale, that would provide a little bit of a mechanism for circumventing it by ensuring that you have an immediate resale, and at that point you're taxing a lower value product that might effectively then be resold at a higher commercial sale. I think we'd want to avoid that. I think we see that with some of our other commodity sales where we've created, and it's unfortunately to some degree constitutional how we've created that mine mouth sale concept, but it allows for some manipulation that we've never been able to head off because of that obligation that maybe we could correct here. At the same time, I guess I would be concerned over the concept of differentiating the price of the electricity component, the generation component of the electrical bill charge versus the transmission component. That can conceptually be separated out, but you can imagine if we're transmitting the electricity quite a ways, how would we take that into consideration, that you're paying for the freight, so to speak, of the transmission of the electricity, which is really not the consumable that we're looking at taxing. And I don't know if that was discussed at all. In the state of Wyoming, I don't think we probably have a problem with that. I think it's going to work itself out just fine. But outside of the state, if transmission costs are disaggregated, it might become an issue, and I don't know if that was discussed. So that's my query.
Mr.
Okay.
Chairman?
Go ahead. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Rothfuss, the transmission, I'll start there. The transmission issue was not discussed. It was merely the sale price at the point of sale, wherever the price is negotiated at. And that was, the intent was to keep it relatively simple. It's not as simple as it seems when you really look at it. And your first point, and you do bring up a good point, the intent was not to make this a value-added tax, which your first point seems to indicate. So if you have a generation transmission company that generates power, they sell it on the market to a co-op. The co-op then sells it later. There are multiple sales there. The intent was it was only the first sale that would trigger the tax. But that's not really clear in the bill. You bring up a very good point. These are some of the points I've thought about over time that need to be resolved for that bill. So that's the reason the bill never was introduced for introductory vote, was after it was written, and as all of you know, a lot of times you have to wait till the bill is actually written to figure out all the good points and the bad points. So that was one of the bad points, again, was that valuation. And it was not intended to keep adding tax on tax, to say a value-added tax as it proceeds down chain to the ratepayer. So those were points that again need to be addressed in any such bill. And after looking at the bill, and sometimes you get a bill back and you think, oh, this isn't really what I wanted, and I see some problems, and that was the reason I pulled it from having an introductory vote on the bill, was to resolve those problems. I want the bill to be as good as possible when it hits the floor. I don't believe in this, well, put it on the floor and we'll amend it there. That just makes everybody's job harder and we don't get as good a work product.
No, and I appreciate that. Mr. Chairman, I have one other follow-up, if I may.
Go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
It's on the local sales and use tax, Mr. Chairman. So if you remove this from the definition so that it stops it from being a taxable asset, as you described, then it seems like it would then fully eliminate it from the local option sales and use tax consideration. How would that be dealt with in this legislation?
Mr. Chairman?
Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Senator Rothfuss, it does eliminate that fifth and sixth penny that some counties have. But in return, at 2.25%, based on all the electricity produced and what we know about current cost, and some of those prices are confidential, in the end, all the counties, the communities, and that net more money than they would under the 4% and then the fifth and sixth penny. That was done on purpose, again, to make it simple instead of having to divide up those local taxes, to keep it as simple as possible. Now, I know the bill is long, and you look at a 25-page bill and say that's not simple, but most of it is in how the money is divided up, not into the construction of the tax itself. So I think the counties were covered. Like I said, the County Commissioners Association participated. They didn't seem to object to that idea. The fiscal note indicated a lot of that. And frankly, we went back and recalculated. And if you just want to break even with a 6% sales tax, you could drop that rate to 1.9%. So the one thing to remember when we do this is that the sales tax on electricity generates about 6 to 7% of the overall sales tax income. So that's not a minor thing. When you're looking at, say, 7% of your income, you need to keep that whole to the state and to the communities also. So that was the intent with the bill, was to keep everybody whole, level playing field, so that everybody's dealing with the same rules, and that not to penalize anyone, but at the same time not to reward them either. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Representative. So I think I recall that the repeal of the electricity tax, the sales tax on electricity, is worth about $44 million, half of which roughly is the local side and half is the state side. That's with the optional taxes, so probably different in different ways of making that up, but that's roughly what we're talking about.
Mr.
Is there
Chairman,
anything, Senator Rothfuss?
sorry to keep going, but a final thought there is the one potential concern there, and I don't know if the cities, towns, and counties mentioned this, but that policy of equitable distribution does benefit those communities that would have that have not opted for any higher number of additional taxes, and then disproportionately penalize effectively those that have. So the communities that are capable of getting away at 4% get a disproportionately high gain relative to those that are operating at 6 cents and considering a 7 cent, which would then have no effect on them. So that is a potential concern where you have communities that are looking for the capacity to influence their own revenue by taking that off the table. It to some degree disempowers that side of the equation. I just think that's something that we need to keep in mind and watch. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you very much. Any other
Mr. Chairman?
questions?
Mr. Chairman?
Go right ahead.
Okay, Mr. Chairman, thank you. Senator Rothfuss, on that point, that's why the length of House Bill 200 was to take care of all those various sales tax issues. When you look at it, the tax on electricity portion of the bill is relatively a few pages. The rest of the bill is how that money is divvied up. I had it divvied up in the same manner as sales tax currently is. So that would be taken into account for those communities because it's patterned more after the sales tax statutes than anything else. So all of that is tended to be covered in there. And that's, like I said, that's the reason for the length of the bill and why it looks a little confusing is we pretty much copied the sales tax regulations and applied it to the to any generation tax. Hope that helps clarify some of that. But it is, Mr. Chairman, it is a matter, all of these are issues that need to be considered and worked through because you always come up with things, the unforeseen consequences that you didn't think about when you had the bill drafted. So I think that's one thing we need to do is look at all of those in here.
Thank you very much, Representative. Anybody else? Any questions on the bills we've had so far?
Mr. Chairman.
Senator Beitman, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr.
Chairman
Chairman.
Beitman.
Thank you.
And Senator Beitman's the only one any person that's ever actually heard one of these bills in his committee. And it was an adventure to you, Senator Beitman.
Always an adventure, Mr. Chairman. Question on the method of taxation we're going here. It looks like I see kind of an income-based approach and a sales price-based approach. Wouldn't it be easier to do it based on like the kilowatt hour or megawatt hour flat rate, based on rate approach, I guess we would say, for everybody pays the same rate? Wouldn't that be easier than trying to tax the dollar amount, whatever that may be?
Yeah. Senator, that's a really, really super good question. And it'll come up again when we talk about some of our external constraints like the multi-state protocol. But I've looked at it both ways. And we did have a university professor a few years ago who suggested that the renewable energy companies were less affected by a per kilowatt by a gross receipts rate than a per kilowatt hour rate. But that it's totally up in the air. We had testimony, I think, from some of the industrial consumers that a revenue-based rate would violate the multi-state protocol, and maybe a per kilowatt base. It implied that a per kilowatt hour base rate may not. And those are all things we have to figure out. We can raise the same amount of money both ways, and we could give the same credits both ways. One bill gives credits and one bill doesn't. We have to decide if that would be important, I think. And we can decide about the sales tax in either instance as well. And so I think both are on the table and maybe equally so. So far, we're kind of looking at revenues, but I think production is certainly another way to do it, and it may have some advantages. That's a good question.
Mr.
Mr.
Chairman?
Chairman?
Let's go with Senator Burkhart, or Representative Burkhart first, and then Senator Rothfuss.
Okay. So thank you, Mr. Chairman. And Chairman Beitman, you raise a very good point. The main reason to look at based on sales price was to have an automatic inflation adjuster in the bill, was the main reason. The legislature, as all of us know, is very poor at keeping up with inflation when we specify a fixed amount. I mean, we have some fees on the books right now that were set in 1977 and have had a very poor job of bringing those up to current requirements, even for the inflation only. So that was the concept there. It is much simpler to do it based on a generation amount, a kilowatt hour, a megawatt hour, except we'd have to go back in routinely probably and adjust it for inflation, because 10 years from now, a fixed amount on a kilowatt hour is going to look pretty cheap compared to what it does today. And that was the main reason, was to let it kind of float so that it adjusts for inflation automatically. But there's nothing sacred about how you do it either way, whether you base it on the sales price or on the megawatt hour. And I know we've tried to put things in statute that says each year we adjust it due to inflation, and that isn't well received. Let's just be honest about that one. So if you set it at an amount per megawatt hour, that's what it'll stay until somebody manages to convince the legislature to change it. Thank you.
Thank you, Representative Burkhart. Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I was going to say, provide a similar thought process, that the volatility of the pricing, and it's not just inflation, it's actually pricing volatility as well, leads to probably the need to have a percentage. You think of oil as an analog, what it would look like if we had a flat dollars per barrel produced on oil, how very, very strange and painful that would end up being from time to time, and the wisdom there. That said, I don't think it's a bad idea. I know that we're going to talk about getting analysis done on this. I don't think it's a bad idea to have exactly that analysis done, Chairman Beitman, to give us the pros and cons of each approach, because obviously both of them work statutorily, and I think each of them has benefits and liabilities, and we're probably not thinking of all of them, so that would be something to include in our scope of work.
Thank you, Senator. Anybody else?
One quick follow-up point to that.
You bet.
Chairman. That's a good point. And, the reason why I brought it up is because we've seen this play out with property taxes, right? As the price goes up and we're basing it on price, people are getting killed. And then I worry this will happen with their electric bills. As their price of electricity goes up, so does their electric bill, because we're taxing the price and not just the kilowatt hour or the megawatt hour. So we could have a really bad perfect storm, so to speak, when if these prices skyrocket, it's really going to hurt our consumers, and ultimately we need to be looking out for our consumers and protecting them as much as possible, and also funding the state. So thank you.
Thank you, Senator. Anybody else at this point? Anybody else? Then I think we might just jump into the constraints we're looking at. Frankly, these bills were developed with looking at the electricity environment that we've recently encountered. And as you're all aware, there was some pretty dramatic activity at the Wyoming Public Service Commission as our major electricity provider in the state filed for a significant rate increase. And so, at the same time in the landscape out there, we see a very drastic and visible change as to how electricity is produced now, changing, and going to be produced in the future. Those are some of the biggest constraints that we have, and they have implications for what our policy should be. The obvious one policy is that our nation, as it fundamentally moves away from fossil fuels, right or wrong, okay, I'm just saying that seems to be the policy we have now, and it may change. But that means that our other sources of revenue are at risk. And the way the electricity is produced and delivered and where it comes from is all going to be different in the future. We have only taxed in the past the one part of it. I mentioned that we do have electricity tax. We call it a coal severance tax. So that's one of the fundamental changes that we're facing as we go forward. But this notion that our consumers are suffering from upward pressures on electricity rates is very real. And unfortunately, it looks like last year wasn't a blip. It was just one of many attempts in this area that are going to go forward that probably will prevail, if I speculate. We can't pretend like there aren't upward pressures on electricity costs for our citizens. So that's a very, very real constraint here that makes the notion of putting in a tax on electricity production very unpalatable to people in Wyoming, even though they may want to see an evolution in the way we collect taxes. So that's why that constraint was addressed very much by looking at the notion of getting rid of a sales tax on electricity and providing a benefit to consumers in Wyoming, all consumers, industrial consumers, residential consumers, commercial consumers, and that would allow for the ability to make this transition. And I need to give credit to Don Burkhart here, Representative Chairman Burkhart. He hit me with this when we were at an Energy Council meeting, and it is brilliant in my mind that we can provide a benefit to our people in the state and at the same time impose a new structure on taxes. So I don't think that we could get away much with raising rates for consumers in Wyoming. They're very sensitive to it. They're going to be more sensitive to it next year when the next one comes and the court cases play out. And that is the realism of the world. This kind of brings us to other questions, though, because this effort to impose a tax will raise challenges, and that's why we need experts on our side. The challenges will come from some who say, well, you're violating interstate commerce. In essence, you're only raising taxes on sales that are exports. That argument will be made. And they'll say that is not appropriate. If you didn't deal with the sales tax and get rid of it, then you'd be on safe ground. But the Commerce Clause says that you can't raise, just export. We tried that many, many years ago. I don't know who was around when we tried the ton-mile tax. Does anybody remember that? Probably not. But in essence, it was thrown out by the courts because of it being a violation of interstate commerce. So we do have to be sensitive to that. And so my contention is, and people make other arguments, is that the sales tax on electricity is wholly within our jurisdiction. We could take it off tomorrow, put it in a year, up, down. We have the ability to do that. A general tax on electricity, whether it's a generation tax or a gross receipts tax, that's also within our purview. We have the ability to do that, and other states have. I think we're going to be able to hear from Mr. Temke that there are other types of taxes out there that states impose. So it's not unheard of. But definitely there will be people that fight us and push back and say, but you're tying these two together. And really what you're doing is this. And so, there are probably various strategies to address that, but that's part of the big reasons for doing this study. Another piece lies within, it's a wholly Rocky Mountain Power situation, and it has to do with something called the multi-state protocol. And the multi-state protocol is an agreement between 6 states that share Rocky Mountain Power and sister company facilities and network to divide up the costs of providing power. And it comes about because we can't all go it alone. We don't have Rocky Mountain Power Wyoming and Rocky Mountain Power Utah, Rocky Mountain Power Pacific Corp Power Washington State. We all share it to get the scale economies. But it also means we share in the major assets like the transmission lines and the generation plants. So those are system assets, if you will, that we've agreed to pay part of. The part that we've agreed to pay is based on our relative consumption, and that's 15% of the Rocky Mountain Power service territory. It might be 16%, but it's an amount like that. We are the smallest of the 6 states, as I understand it. So that agreement says that a state can't get out of sharing the system costs. You know, and there was a point made in the last rate case from Rocky Mountain Power, and it had to do with a plant, gas-fired facility in Washington State, that the state of Washington wished to impose additional costs for operation, emissions fees, if you wish, and wanted that to be flown through, and Wyoming would pay some of those costs. That went well as far as that, but what Washington State also did was give a credit to Washington State consumers with regard to that additional cost of running that plant. That's the part that didn't fly. And that's the part that we argued and was a violation of the multi-state protocol affecting Rocky Mountain Power. What will happen is undoubtedly states in the protocol will argue that if we put in this kind of a tax structure where we unburden with another tax the people in Wyoming and put in a general tax applicable to Wyoming and other states, that really is just Wyoming trying to get out of paying the tax, and that's a violation of the multi-state protocol. And I think, Senator Beitman, you heard those 2 arguments from lots of people at the hearing you held on the sales tax repeal bill, which I'm very grateful that you did that. So that is a piece of this that we need good advice. And that's more in the legal area. Both of those are legal questions. And that is part of what this study is about, because we need to be able to come up with a policy that we think is defendable and go forward. Let's be clear, we will probably be litigating any policy we take up. That's just the way the world is now. And what I'm happy to answer any questions on that. The other thing that we're going to hear, Senator Rothfuss, you go ahead.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, I am curious how well we have a handle on, and maybe this is a subject that we can add to our study, the tax structures in the other states of the multi-state protocol, and how theirs is differentiated relative to in-state versus out-of-state taxation on power produced in those locations, and what types of taxes and tax structures our ratepayers are effectively paying into on behalf of the multi-state protocol. I realize that Washington circumstance was effectively trying to game it, but is that something that we've investigated already in the past, and maybe you would, through corporations, or Senator Beitman through revenue, have reports on that, or is that something that we need to dig into?
Senator Rothfuss, thank you for that. We've looked at it a bit, and I would like to make reference to Mr. Temke, who has looked at the level of and types of electricity taxes that exist in other states. And this might be a very good time to get his input. That was not done in specific to the Rocky Mountain Power states and the multi-state protocol, but I think, and that work was actually done a couple, 3 years ago. But what we did learn, and I believe it was through revenue, when I was in revenue, if I'm trying to remember, but the essence is that states have all sorts of different types of electricity taxes, and we we were looking at it in the sense, and this is another question, electricity producers will argue that if we do any kind of new tax, new cost that will affect them, that will make Wyoming an uneconomic and undesirable place to locate new generation. And, you know, we've heard that argument before. At some level, a tax would be high enough to make that happen. And so we looked at the level of other taxes in different states to try to get at that question. But I admit that it's been fairly cursory that we've looked at it. But if Mr. Temke, is it possible for you to weigh in at this point and just talk about the generality of electricity taxes in other states? And I realize you haven't looked at it specifically with respect to Rocky Mountain Power territory.
Thank you, Chairman Case. And actually, I have prepared a memo and done analysis several times. The last time was actually for the Revenue Committee. I updated that memorandum last June. And I can go ahead and email that to all of you, that link in the Revenue Committee materials. It was more just a comparison of specific electrical generation taxes in other states. It did not try to look at the whole entire taxation mix of those states, but was just comparing those states that specifically have an electrical generation tax. And I can go ahead and send that to you if that would be helpful so you could see that.
That sounds very good. Is there anything you can say about those different taxes that other people have?
Well, what comes to mind is it seems like the gross receipts tax that has been contemplated in Wyoming is pretty similar to what Idaho does with their wind generation tax and their solar generation tax. Their gross receipts percentages are a little bit different. I think let's see. The wind is taxed at 3% of gross earnings. The solar is taxed at 3.5%. One thing that I found in the other states, though, as well, is that when they did have a generation tax, there were several states that made those taxes in lieu of property taxes. So that seems to be a consideration of other states, you know, to not pile on the taxes, if you will, on this particular energy, but industry, but make the generation tax in lieu of property tax, or yes, in lieu of property taxes instead.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Dean. I think it would be good if you were to share that, and also let's post it so the public can have access to that. So Senator Rothfuss, to answer your question, we have not done a comparison of state by state overall tax burden. We've looked at specific taxes with respect to electricity and how that works. But to compare the overall tax burden, we have not done that analysis since we imposed the original wind tax. And if you guys that have been around a couple of years, we had hired a well-known national consulting firm. They were actually based on the West Coast. And I believe their name was E3. And I think it was Energy Environment. I can't remember what the third E was. And they did an analysis of the desirability of Wyoming versus other states for locating wind resources. And the idea was we were trying to figure out what the sweet spot would be in terms of a proposed wind tax we were thinking of doing at that time. And they looked at the competitiveness of other states. So remember, New Mexico figured prominently on other technologies in other states. And they gave us an answer and a range. And that study is still out there. I'm sure we could find that study and post it, make it available since we're making reference to it. A few years back, and when I say few years now, it always is a little bit more than a few years, which I tried to do that study because it was argued that a lot of the fundamental things have changed. And so I actually approached that company to see what it would cost to redo their analysis, to update it. And this is the craziest part. I was told that that model that the state of Wyoming bought and paid for was now that they had basically committed the rights to that model to renewable energy producer. And I was very livid because what it meant was that we had paid for a model to be developed that would answer these questions. And now we couldn't use that model anymore. We couldn't get someone to do it. So the E3 analysis, we weren't able to update through E3. That's my recollection of those events at the time. And it kind of shows how nasty and big this whole tax environment is, I think. So it's too bad because that was a pretty good model. It was very extensive and it looked at the relative basis, exactly what Senator Rothfuss is talking about, the relative things in Wyoming, not just the electricity tax itself, but about all the other tax burdens. And it even looked at some other factors. So maybe that can be part of this RFP, or at least we can begin to think about that. So anything else from Mr. Temke, or anything else before we jump in to start talking about the RFP possibility?
Mr. Chairman?
Yes, Chairman Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. There was also work done on all of the generation taxes by National Council of State Legislators, and frankly, I remembered to bring that report somewhere around Arlington as I was driving here. So it's sitting on my desk at home. I can scan that in and send it to the committee. I can say that some states' generation tax is odd at best. It's convoluted. There were some states I really couldn't figure out what they were doing, and so I hope that the power company's tax department can figure those out. But I can scan that in and have it sent to the members here.
Excellent idea. And before you go to the trouble of doing that, maybe it's available electronically from NCSL. Could we get someone, if you can give the reference, Chairman Burkhart, to what the title of the study is? I bet we could get it electronically from NCSL, and then we could make it available to the public and to the members, and it might save you the trouble of scanning it. Let's try that first.
Good idea.
Thank you for that. That's perfect. Thank you. Anything else before we talk about the RFP? Anything else? I'm not seeing anything, so I think we would let it's been a long time since I've done an RFP through the legislative process. I remember we did one on mineral taxes a considerable amount of time ago, and at one other time I was chairman of a subcommittee on employee benefits, and we had an RFP and worked through that. Some of you may have had more experience in developing a LSO-based RFP, and please weigh in. But what we've asked staff to come up with just some preliminary structure, and he can, Mr. Anderson can talk about maybe the constraints that we're under, which I don't fully understand, and I'd just like to yield to him to get us thinking about the RFP, if that's all right. Mr. Anderson.
Mr. Chairman, Josh Anderson. So I just, you'll see in the materials, there's this kind of draft RFP, just mostly for committee discussion and to start this process. When we do these types of procurements, we go through the Department of A&I under the executive branch, and they have a whole procurement division over there. This one that you'll see is just based on our most recent one we did in the office, which was hiring someone to do the audits of the office as an agency. So as you look through this, you'll see kind of there's two different types of highlights I did. The yellow highlighted provisions are changes where it just specifically said audit or had provisions that were specific to that audit, and I changed that, based primarily on Chairman Case's discussion of this issue in front of Management Council as they approved this subcommittee. So could certainly use more fleshing out by the committee for those details. Then there's also the green highlighted provisions, some of which will need to come through A&I after we finalize the RFP on our end. We send it to A&I. They will give it a proposal number. They'll also, we can set that date, but the date will need to be at least 30 days after we finalize it through A&I. So that will be the minimum amount of time, will be a 30-day release. We can certainly have a different time period if that's what the subcommittee would like. There's some other dates in here that there's a time to respond for questions, and I think that has to be 10 days after the RFP is released and on the street, and then the agency and or the subcommittee would have 3 to 5 days to respond to those questions. So some of those will fall into place as we get in there. Some of the other green highlighted provisions are just things that could be changed by the committee. I don't know if you want me to kind of quickly go through and highlight things or how you want to do this. I don't know.
I think that would be best, Josh. And it is available on the website for people following along online, right?
Yes, it is, Mr. Chairman.
I think it would be good for you to go through, and I'm a little bit confused as what things are procurement rules that we have to follow because we're government, or what things are specific to us. But I think I got that between the two types of highlighting. But things like the 30 days and the 3 days to respond, that's procurement rules, right?
Correct, Mr. Chairman. And a lot of this, you'll see the portions that aren't changed are largely boilerplate and common to most of these RFPs that go out. Certainly some of it could be changed if the subcommittee has a deep desire to do so, but large parts of this are just boilerplate, and I tried to highlight the parts where we either should or could change things.
Okay, everybody, I'm pulling it up on my screen. And I was thinking that Josh would take us through this as it is. But if you have questions as we go along, would you speak up, please? Because I won't actually see you. And because I'm looking at the proposal as we go forward. So appreciate that. Josh, go right ahead.
All right, Mr. Chairman, and I think we're going to try to maybe just share it on the screen in general so that everyone's looking at the same thing. If you give us a moment here, we can get that done.
That'll actually be easier. Now I can see. I still can't see everybody, so speak up when you have a question.
So yeah, Mr. Chairman, just kind of real quickly, page by page here, you'll see there's a proposal number that we'll get that'll be generated by A&I, so we don't have to worry about that. The yellow highlighted portion there, again, that was just on that first page, was just the title I came up with. As I noted, the date we can set, but that will have to be at least that 30-day period. That'll depend on, of course, when we come up with what we believe is the final RFP. And then A&I will assign that procurement representative. That will be someone in their office. Over to page 3, Mr. Chairman. Just a very brief description there of what the committee is looking for as far as who this consultant may be. You'll see it was primarily legal in nature there, although some of the discussion today was also maybe looking at some of those economic impacts. So I don't know if we will want to expand that or add a separate deliverable, and there's a deliverable section later on in the proposal that can get into more detail there. On to page 4, Mr. Chairman. Again, these are just the date and who the buyer is will be assigned at a later time. Let's see, next big thing or bigger changes on page 7. You'll see again there we'll have to note that date, and then in the middle of the page there, that highlighted portion was again that when that question time frame will be. If there's any questions related to what we're looking for with the RFP, those would have to be submitted within a 10-day time period. And then, as noted, we'd have 3 to 5 days to respond to that. Next, Mr. Chairman, again, page 10, there will be a series of dates there as we get this finalized. Again, those will all kind of come into play after we set that final date. On page 11, here's kind of some of the big background of what we're looking for. And so I think the subcommittee will definitely need to have their input on this page as to what they're looking for, and as they hire this consultant. Over to page 12. Mr. Chairman, again, here's where we get into the scope of this project. You'll see there's some, again, I tried to be fairly general based on my understanding, but certainly can be fleshed out by the committee. And you'll see, again, there's some dates there that we will need to address. The audit one did allow for a series of renewals or extensions of the contract for up to 3 different audit periods. So I don't know if we will need to include anything on renewals, but highlighted that for committee discussion. Then you'll see towards the bottom of the page under 2.6, again, there's a cost for electricity tax study. If there's any other deliverables that the committee is interested in, could add those there. It can be as specific or general as needed. So for example, if you wanted to specify attendance at a certain number of meetings, that could be a separate deliverable, or even attendance during the session. If that was something the subcommittee was interested in, again, that could be added as a separate deliverable, or anything else that the subcommittee is looking for in regards to this study. A lot of the rest of the next few pages is all pretty much boilerplate. The next big change, I think, is starting on page 18. You'll see there's some scoring provisions. And again, the points that are highlighted there are just how that was set up by when they created the audit RFP. So the committees would be free to adjust those scoring provisions any way they see fit, and adjust those points as you would like.
And Josh, does A&I require some kind of scoring system, or can we just do without it?
Mr. Chairman, I will have to look into that further, but I believe it's pretty standard to have these scoring provisions in there.
Okay. So
Just so the people applying can have some idea of how their proposals will be ranked.
Thank you, Josh. Keep going.
Yeah, and so then, Mr. Chairman, again, most largely boilerplate there. You'll see again on page 23, kind of the last page. Again, that's the deliverable for the electricity tax study, and then can have additional deliverables as determined by the subcommittee. But that's essentially kind of where we are as a first draft of this, Mr. Chairman, and I think there's some we'll need some significant input from the subcommittee to get this wrapped up, but that's where we're starting from.
You don't think we'll have it done within the hour? I kind of doubt it. Josh, one preliminary question. I know we've talked about in terms of one RFP, one study. It occurs to me that we don't necessarily have to do it that way. We could hire someone to do the legal analysis and then hire someone to do economic work, should we want to do that. I confess that I saw the obstacle to the bills that we had at the legislature, these legal arguments that it's not possible, that it either violates the multi-state protocol or it's going to violate the interstate commerce clause, and that we're not going to be able to do that. And in the end, we'd actually be on the hook possibly for the taxes we impose as being the most significant obstacle. And it was really the legal analysis presented, I think, in Senator Beitman's Revenue Committee in the Senate that got me thinking that way. But I do understand that there is a desire on these other economic pieces. But I don't know how far our money would go. I personally wouldn't mind breaking it up, or rather than trying to find someone to do all. So if we had two RFPs, are we in trouble with management council or in any other way if we just did two separate ones, one on economic analysis and one on legal? Or, the other way is we just do one and we encourage people that are experts in economic analysis to find a very good legal talent to be part of their team and vice versa. But Josh, thoughts on that, and maybe other committee members' thoughts?
Yeah, good question, Mr. Chairman. I don't know exactly what the direction from management council, if it would limit you guys to just one RFP. I wouldn't want to speak for them, but it certainly would be, I think, a feasible option to do a second RFP if that's the way the subcommittee wanted to go.
Yeah, so we'll kind of have that on the table. Committee discussion and thoughts. Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. I do agree with what you're thinking on having two separate RFPs. I think it would be challenging to get one shop that achieved what we want on the economic analysis while simultaneously having a legal team to do this consideration that we want. So those are probably two very separate challenges.
Mm-hmm. Thank you very much. Representative Larson, welcome.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So one thing that I'm just really concerned about, and this might already be addressed, I've not been through a process like this before, but I don't want representatives of or people who have direct affiliation with the companies that may be affected by this tax to be able to apply for this in this process. So.
Yes, and thank you very much for that. Josh, is there any automatic ways that we prevent that from happening, or do we have to weed that out, or how does that happen?
Again, good question, Mr. Chairman. This is certainly a process that I haven't been directly involved in, although other members of the office certainly have, and I'll rely on their expertise. But I don't believe there would be an automatic filter out of that. It certainly could be even something maybe spelled out in the scoring as to any industry tie-ins as far as that goes, but I'll have to do a little more exploring on that issue.
And that's fair enough. Can we require that an applicant disclose any other relationships and any potential conflicts in the area? They could do that privately, I don't know that they need to do it publicly, but we could require that they disclose any conflicts, I suppose. Like in the area, you guys, of utility regulation, it's a surprisingly small universe when you look at who has expertise in Rocky Mountain Power's multi-state protocol. The outside lawyers in Wyoming that aren't already connected to someone in the industry is probably the big goose egg. But we at least have to know those relationships and understand. And like over at the university, there are experts that were formerly at the Public Service Commission. And we value their input. Would they be, and if they don't have a current relationship with anything else, we wouldn't disqualify them, I wouldn't think. But Representative Larson brings up just an excellent point, and it is a very, very small universe. And we know that there's a lot of, it's a huge industry, a very growing industry with lots of public affairs capabilities and connections. So fair enough, we got to keep that high on the list. Anybody else, any thoughts? Should we jump in and maybe just try to say what questions are we trying to ask and get Josh to give us kind of take a crack if we were to do that? In the legal area, have we covered the idea that we're looking at Commerce Clause implications and multi-state and utility regulation implications and pitfalls? And just some of which, you guys, we could get rid of if we were to not get rid of the sales tax in Wyoming. Somebody has an open mic on, if they could maybe mute themselves. I'm not sure who it is, but I mean, one way we could go forward to make the legal analysis simpler is to not get rid of the sales tax on electricity in the state of Wyoming. Indeed, impose a new tax that is equivalent to Wyoming customers in other places. That probably simplifies the legal analysis, but comes at a great cost to our policy directive. So I assume we still want to keep that in place as part of the legal analysis we're looking for. Is that fair?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman.
Go ahead, Senator Rothfuss.
Yeah, I do think that the desire for a uniform tax concept, where right now it is just Wyoming residents that are paying a tax on electrical power generation, I think that's actually in some ways more consistent with interstate commerce, where the criteria is generally uniformity of taxation, so that all taxpayers are paying a uniform rate. Therein lies the challenge. So I do think that we need to explore that and see how that can be structured. The crediting back aspect, inquiring specifically about that, does that then generate non-uniformity? That might be a problem. So that was in your bill. That might cause non-uniformity because we wouldn't necessarily be providing credit back in other circumstances. So trying to explore what case law is out there and how they've ruled in this space on the uniformity with regard to the interstate commerce. I think that's an important provision. And clearly there have been a lot of instances of court cases in this area. So I would think that we would get a robust case law analysis available to us that gives us this appears to be okay and this appears not to be okay with regard to uniform taxation.
So Senator Rothfuss, if I could read back what I think I heard you say, and I thought it was very eloquent, that maybe to repackage this, instead of getting rid of a sales tax on Wyoming customers, we're actually extending a type of taxation to match it to other customers. so that we're equivalent, or did I read too much in what you said?
No, that's exactly what we're doing. We're trying to create uniformity of taxation, and right now we only tax Wyoming customers on our power generation. So that is consistent typically with themes of interstate commerce, and it's quite the opposite then of what the state of Washington was trying to do, which was to do the reverse of that, right? Only tax out of state. As you mentioned earlier, we really struggle with that. That's not going to fly. But in this circumstance, we actually have the opposite, where we tax power generated in the state of Wyoming. We tax our consumers for that, and then when we send it out of state, we don't tax it. So this is a circumstance of creating that uniformity.
Thank you, Senator Rothfuss. I always like your brain. Anyway, in terms of the legal questions.
Mr. Chairman, Senator Beitman had his hand up. I know you can't see
Oh, I
everyone.
didn't see it. I'm sorry.
Sorry.
Go ahead, Senator Beitman. Chairman
Didn't want to
Beitman.
interrupt. Along with the legal arguments, I don't want to limit us just to the Commerce Clause
Right.
legal arguments. I'd like to look at the 9th and 10th Amendment arguments that Wyoming could be making as far as coal generation and other things. So
Mhm.
let's not limit ourselves just to the Commerce Clause. I think all options should be on the table as far as our self-determination and what we want to do as a state, and take a look at that and how it, like you said, ties into the agreements that we're already obliged to follow. So give us some wiggle room in that as well.
So help me, Senator Beitman. Can you be a little bit more specific? Because I don't want you to be disappointed when you see what's written on the paper. But we're all going to approve what's written on the paper. But tell me more what you would like to see in that area.
I would like to see what, a legal opinion on, if Wyoming decides we're all in on coal, for instance, and we want to build more coal-fired power plants. As a state, should we be able to do that because, we're a sovereign state, and not let other states tell us, no, you can't because, we don't like coal. Basically what they're doing to us in reverse, right? They're telling us you have to use wind, even though our citizens don't necessarily want to look at wind turbines. Why aren't you building wind turbines in California along the beach where it's windy? We know the answer to that, right? So take a reverse of their position and use it to our advantage, where we have the coal, we want to use it, we want to burn it, we want to have reliable, affordable power at a low cost. And I think, yes, there's a Commerce Clause issue there, but I think there's also a 9th and a 10th Amendment states' rights issue that is at play that maybe might need to be looked at.
Thank you, Senator Beitman. Let's have the committee kind of think about that for a second. Is that an issue you want to add to this study? Is it within the purview of what Management Council has kind of given us marching orders? And is it overly complicate things, or is it right on? Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Well, I appreciate the good senator's point, and we do want to make sure that we can kind of control our destiny. I don't think that that's within the purview of this discussion. We're talking about taxation and not picking which industry we like the best. We're talking about a tax on electricity across the board. So,
Are there other thoughts from any members? Senator Beitman, we haven't thrown you out of the room yet. I would say, can you come up with some language that you'd like to propose to be included and run it by the committee?
Yes, sir.
I'm sort of thinking that Representative Larson kind of nailed my thoughts a little bit, but let's hear you out on that. And maybe if you want to write something up, we'll all take a look at it for sure, and we'll share it with people. Yeah, well, it's up to you whether you want us to share it or not, but if it's going to be a committee consideration, I'd like to share it with the world. So thank you. Any other thoughts on the legal side? Senator Rothfuss. Senator Rothfuss first, then we'll go to Chairman Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Briefly, Josh just sent around a brief that he did back in 2017 on a somewhat related but different issue that gets a little bit at supremacy clause with taxation. But I do think that this statement from a U.S. Supreme Court decision, Granholm versus Held, back in 2005 is poignant to the point I was making a few minutes ago. It's time and again this court has held that in all but the narrowest circumstances, state laws violate the Commerce Clause if they mandate differential treatment of in-state and out-of-state economic interests that benefits the former and burdens the latter. And that's the key is the differentiation of benefit. A uniform tax is the antithesis of that.
Thank you, Senator. Let's make that available. Can we also make that available to the public? Thank you.
Yeah, we can do that, Mr. Chairman.
Great. Chairman Burkhart.
So, Mr. Chairman, that was going to be my point. Things need to be uniform across the board, no matter whether they're in state, out of state. It needs to apply equally to all. Like I said in my other comments, call it a level playing field for everyone. And it doesn't matter. I'm agnostic towards the method of generation. It could be wind, solar, who knows? Fusion may come on in the next year or two. I doubt it, but it addresses any generation because right now we just have a mess of taxing wind, taxing nuclear, not taxing solar. Again, make it uniform. I would suggest that if we run 2 RFPs, that we put in there that the two companies that are chosen have to coordinate with each other because there may be technical issues that cause a legal issue and vice versa. So just that one on the books and that. And I don't know how you eliminate, companies. I would say none of the companies involved should be giving us it, but you have like the Edison Electric Institute, EPRI, Electric Power Research Institute, and those who may want to bid on the RFP, want to put a proposal in. And I know there are other groups out there, North American Electric Reliability Council, and some others. So I think they should link them. We should link them that they coordinate with each other because we could end up with 2 very different proposals that don't really match. But again, level playing field, we don't single out anyone for special treatment either way. Thank you.
And
Thank you.
Mr. Chairman, can I follow up on that? Because I think Senator
Yes, you
Burkhart
can.
makes a strong point. I think we need to set an example very clearly that we are fully electron neutral and that our tax policy with regard to power generation does not in any way differentiate from the source of that power. So the moment that you have electrons, we tax those at a uniform rate regardless of their source. Because again, that's what we as a state have been preaching, that this power needs to be treated uniformly. We've railed against circumstances where the power is being differentiated in other states. And I think that's one of the central tenets we need to hold to is we want to be the exemplar for that type of policy where you can have other concerns, you can have other policies around air permitting, land permitting, whatever else you want on that backside. But the idea that you would actually differentiate the electrons once produced is pretty absurd. And I think we should hold to that through whatever policy we end up producing.
And if you allow me, I'd like to push on both of you, and I think I know where this would go, but I pose the question. In the one bill, the House Bill 147, we allowed for credits for other taxes paid by the producer. We didn't really care where the taxes came from, but we looked for providing credits to their total tax obligation if they pay a lot of other in-state taxes. Does the same argument apply that you and Representative Burkhart are making, that indeed that is also part of leveling the playing field? Or is it unleveling the playing field, if you wish? And I think I'd like to hear from Rothfuss first on that, in the sense that it seems to be the equivalent way you made the argument about the different states, but tell me.
Mr. Chairman, I think that's a good policy if we can get it right, but it might be something that we're not allowed to do in the legal analysis based on the potential for bias. So I think that's something we need to consider. From my perspective, stacking taxation in state does cause biases against because we're charging some industries more than others on the total overall taxation. If our intent is to create uniformity of taxation regardless of power, then it does make sense that we provide some thoughtful credit, something along those lines. And so if you, as a good example, if you're burning Wyoming coal in the state of Wyoming, and you start rolling up the taxes that have been paid for that megawatt hour of power, and then you look at an alternative source. Let's say you've got a geothermal plant that you're putting together, and you look at it, and it doesn't have any severance associated with it, but it's probably got property tax and sales and use associated. I think that's a very worthwhile discussion. Do we want uniformity there at the top level? It does become effectively a value-added tax approach where it rolls up to whatever that highest level tax is. There's a lot of reasoning and analysis behind that tax approach, because it allows you to be taxing the highest value product without penalizing what got you to that highest value product through redundancies. That's why VATs are popular, is that thought process, right? Don't punish a multi-step process that is all in your state because you've taxed it 7 times. Look at the final product and tax it. I think it's a great discussion for us to have. It's something that I think is probably good policy. But again, I don't think if that causes constitutional concerns with the interstate commerce, if we get back reasoning that suggests that we can't do that, I think we need to take that seriously. I don't want to lose a better leveling of the playing field just because it's not the perfect leveling of the playing field.
Thank you, Senator. Representative Burkhart, did you want to weigh in on that question?
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Yes, and to add on to what Senator Rothfuss said, I think these are issues that we could take care of in the consultant study from an economic basis plus the legal basis. Where do we go from here? What really becomes a good economic solution and what becomes a good legal solution? And I see difficulties on both sides. That's why I suggested all the consultants coordinate with each other, talk to each other, and that. And again, I'm agnostic as to how you generate it. If you look at the power plants currently that burn coal, they sell it back to the coal mines because the coal mines are one of our biggest industrial users of power, and they end up paying a sales tax on it. Now, I understand they can take a tax deduction on their federal income tax for the utilities paid, but they still have to pay it. And a deduction isn't the same as a credit. So, we need to look at all of these variable economic factors that fit in. We may find that eliminating the sales tax in favor of inviting more power companies into Wyoming may be a better economic solution due to the ad valorem tax, the property taxes, and everything else that they would pay. So that's just my thoughts on where to go. I think Senator Rothfuss made some good points that we need to consider. And yes, it's going to be very difficult to spell all of this out in the proposal to these companies.
Fair enough. Thank you very much. Representative Larson.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So, and just one more thought that kind of popped up in my head. Oftentimes these renewable companies, they claim that if we tax them at the same rate as coal generated power, then they won't be economically viable projects. And I think that's going to be the way that we weed out these projects in the state that we really aren't in favor of anyways. So if we can make it an equal playing field, at least they're paying their fair share to come into the state and, in my opinion, damage our beautiful scenery. So.
Thank you, Representative Larson. Okay, I hear you on that. What about the economic pieces? There could be a separate RFP or what? Some of those questions we just went down were a little bit economic, but they seem to be mostly legal. Senator
Chairman?
Rothfuss.
On the economics, we've hit on some of the key concepts. We really need to explore and understand taxation, because it right now is entirely piecemeal on a state-by-state basis. Right, we have a tax structure that is even in itself a little bit piecemeal, but maybe not as bad as what some other states have carved out. At the end of the day, when you're contemplating whether the state of Wyoming is economically competitive to generate power, it is the total tax burden as a key concept, but in some ways it's even more than that, because it does matter when you pay your taxes. Are you paying your taxes out of cash flow, or are you paying your taxes out of finance? That makes a difference. If you have to finance your upfront sales and use taxes, for example, we know that that's a more expensive burden than cash flowing ongoing expenses on certain sales and use or property tax. So from our perspective, and then if you layer on some power production taxes or anything else that's paid, you end up at least with the concept of a gross tax on the power that maybe we can make something which is closer to apples to apples. It'll never be apples to apples, because that time of payment and circumstances of payment will matter. But at least if we can get to the point where we can understand what is our tax burden right now on a kilowatt or a megawatt hour of power produced in the state of Wyoming by power type, that's good for us to know. And then the ideal, which this probably would be unachievable and ridiculously expensive, but having that for 50 states, understanding what is the tax burden on each type of power per megawatt hour for each state, right? That's the dream spreadsheet for us to be looking at. That might not be achievable. I wish NCSL had it. They don't seem to, but that's the aspirational concept. And how close to that can we get, Mr. Chairman?
Though realistically, Senator, I think our competitors in the power production are mostly in the Western power grid. It is, of course, breaking down as we're getting DC interties across the grids that are allowing for power exchanges. But still, our co-op friends use those DC interties quite a bit in Wyoming. But if our analysis mostly focused on the Western world, it would be most of the data. To you, Senator.
I was just going to say, Mr. Chairman, and that's a great first narrowing then, right? In the absence of being able to get all 50 states, now what would our priority 10 states be? And yeah, I think we could easily narrow it down to comparator states that would be much more reasonable to focus on for more detailed analysis. And I agree with you on that. And obviously we're selling into the same market at that point as well. So even though I'll arbitrarily choose Pennsylvania as a state that would be a very interesting state for us to very deeply understand, maybe we add that to our list, but maybe at the end of the day, it's less important for us to understand Pennsylvania because we're not currently in competitive power generation markets.
That's the way I would look at it. Thank you, Senator. In order to move this forward, Senator Rothfuss, would you be able to drop a couple, 3 paragraph or so on this proposal?
Into the
idea of being part of the RFP to share it around?
Yep.
Okay. Other economic questions? Oh, Senator Beitman.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. It's partial legal, partial economic. It goes back to when you mentioned there's a $27.50 megawatt hour credit for wind. Looking at if we're truly going to have an equal playing field, taking that and reversing it and either eliminating it at the state level and offering it to coal as a credit, or adding a 2750 tax on the wind to offset the credit. There's a legal issue there and also an economic question there. And I would like those answered. What would be the effect if we ran a bill or part of a bill to eliminate or offset that credit to truly level the playing field in Wyoming?
You're a good dog with a bone, Senator. I always appreciate it.
Thank you.
You're fabulous. I know the production tax credit exists. I don't think it's always the same for everything. There's a vintage issue. For many years, it was going to go away, but then it was extended. And I think during the COVID days, it got the present amount. It is time limited for projects, I believe. So there's a lot more to learn there and I don't mean to overly say it's that simple, but suffice to say there is a very large federal incentive just in terms of production, which leads to some weird market distortions where people will sell things at a negative, which is bizarre and really kills dispatchable power. But so I don't know. My heart is sometimes right there with you that it just doesn't seem fair, and I hate the federal subsidies. But on the other hand, they seem to be a very realistic piece of the landscape. Certainly, that would absolutely kill the renewable industry, and so they seem to be very price sensitive. They exist on a very slim margin, and I'm sure we're going to hear about it in our public comment period. But I know you'd like to do that, and I know why you'd like to do that. But I have a little trouble saying that we should do that in this study. And I look to the rest of the members of the committee if they want to weigh in. They're all sitting on their hands, I will note. Senator Rothfuss.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, I'd be concerned about focusing on that for what we're working on right now, where we're trying to level it. I feel like the more likely outcome there would simply be elimination of industries from existing in the state, as opposed to trying to come up with something that provides uniformity. And I realize that the higher goal there is to provide uniformity by effectively canceling out the federal tax credit. But to the extent that we can't do that everywhere, it's a push out at that point, and that's a plausible policy, but I don't know that that's an objective that I would necessarily support, because again, we don't all want to eliminate wind turbines. Some of us want to eliminate wind turbines. And so it seems like this would be taking what probably has a lot of consensus behind it, which is to create a uniform revenue structure, and turning it into a fight over wind power. And I hope to avoid that. I just don't want this working group to be about do we or don't we like wind power. I want it to be what is an electron neutral electricity tax that's fair once you've generated that electricity to the greatest degree we can. So the more we can stay neutral, I think the better our product will be. And obviously that'll be a challenge for us all by itself without injecting our own opinions. If we spend our time, Mr. Chairman, saying, well, some of us like coal, some of us don't like coal, some of us like wind, some of us don't like wind, some of us like geothermal, don't, solar, don't. If it becomes that, I think we do what we've done for many, many years, which is not pass a bill.
and everybody would agree that Senator Beitman can bring some proposed language that we can vote up or down. I mean, we'll certainly be able to do that as we go forward with this. So, we're gonna approve the RFP by a majority vote in our committee process. So, get out there and do some lobbying. That'd be good for you. Not, you're a
And-
good lobbyist. I didn't mean anything pejorative by that. It gives you a chance to bring that forward.
And Mr. Chairman, I just would add, I'm not necessarily anti-wind, or I just wanted, if we're gonna do a deep dive, I just wanted to go as deep as we possibly can on this, if we're gonna spend the time and money on it. And that's
Yeah.
why I mentioned the going after these subsidies and what the effect of reversing at the state level these subsidies would be on an economic level and a legal level. So
And it's
that's
a
where I'm-
great question, sir. I look at this in a more practical way, that we have this new landscape of electricity production. We got to decide how our tax structure is going to fit in. And I don't see your idea as being necessarily achievable in terms of our fitting our coal plants into the new West and the other states and all of that. I don't think it leads us to a secure tax future in any way, even though coal is very desirable and a very good revenue stream. As we move forward, and other states don't want our coal, we have a hard time doing it just here unless we can just have an immense number of data centers that are going to use that output. And so it is a possibility, and I encourage you to bring something. I just can't get my head around it right now. And I'm
Mr.
conscious of
Chairman?
the time. We do want to get to the point where we can open this up for public comment.
Yeah.
And have staff with enough direction that they can get us another draft that we would certainly share overall. Senator Rothfuss.
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, one other thing I forgot to mention earlier, my apologies, that I don't think anyone has really thought through well. If we're putting forward a comprehensive solution, we need to give a little bit of thought to how it works to be an energy storage unit, some sort of capacitance unit on the grid, because we will have plenty of that in the future. We don't have a lot of it right now, but that's something that will certainly come up over the next decade and become significant. So if I'm buying power at 2 cents a kilowatt hour because right now it's cheap or free, as you mentioned, I'm buying power at 0 cents per kilowatt hour, and then I'm coming back and selling it. I'm for 6 cents a kilowatt hour a little later. How are we going to treat that? I think it's something for us to contemplate. Are those both? Is that a dual sale event, or is that a tax credit event on the differential? Is that a value added? Because it certainly isn't a consumption of power at that point, realistically, although it's from an engineering standpoint, it's a proportionate consumption because you've got waste. But the reality is, you're taking in a certain number of megawatt hours and then you're selling those megawatt hours later. The taxation on that needs to be part of our solution.
And it's a great something to think about. And you guys, what we're talking about is storage of energy. That would be, the basic concept is storage can make renewables work a lot better, and potentially make other forms of generation work a lot better too, because when electricity is plentiful, you might be able to store it and draw it in the future. Batteries are one form of storage. Of course, that's very limited now. There's no such thing as a real grid, multiple day capable batteries. But there are technologies that are coming about. One is pumped hydro, which apparently there are a lot of permitting activity in Wyoming. And there are other forms of electricity storage, including molten salts. And in fact, the nuclear reactor that would be at the Kemmer plant, you could think of it as being, it produces electricity kind of at a fixed rate, but they store extra in molten salt or molten, am I correct on the salt?
Yes, correct.
Molten salt, and then we'll be able to draw down at much greater amounts. So do you just look outside the plant when they're dumping electricity in the grid, or do you think about the internal transaction there? It's sort of the same question for pumped hydro tied to renewables, and I don't really have the answer. You could just look at the net transaction if it's the same company, like you would with the nuclear power plant. But if it's different companies and they're buying and selling, there's two transactions there.
Yeah.
So
Thank you, Mr.
that's a
Chairman.
great point. It needs to be thought about and included. We don't want to, and it's going to be a very important part of the future of electricity provision.
Thank you, Mr.
What-
Chairman. And the net contemplating the net power is probably the right answer in the end.
At least if it's the same company. I mean,
Exactly.
you
Yep.
know, it strikes me that we do the same thing in some of our mineral taxation about what costs are internal to the process and which are not. So good point. Let's put that on the tick list. Anything else on the economic world? Okay, to go forward, would it be possible, and let's hear public comment, but maybe to have another draft come about with some more input from different members and our staff as we get to get another draft that would be available for the committee and the public. Josh, what do you think?
So, Mr. Chairman, one thing we discussed, and we had done something like this, the shooting complex task force, we put the RFP out on SharePoint and let the members of that group go in and offer edits, and then we came back together to kind of discuss those proposed changes one by one. And that might be a way to approach this. We could do something similar where we could allow the members of the subcommittee to offer edits and then
That sounds good. What do people think about that proposal? And then how do we, Josh, how does the shooting complex committee get to where the public gets to look at the draft again?
yeah, so then we then had another meeting similar to this on Zoom, where we kind of went through one by one and talked about those changes before they took a final vote on what that RFP would look like. So
I think that works, and that would be acceptable public process. Is that okay with everybody? Josh, you'll have to help lead us in that, are you on the shooting complex task force?
yes, sir, Mr. Chairman. Yeah, we can do something similar to what they did. We'll send out a link here in the next few days to that document, and then if you want to give a timeline as you wrap this meeting up today, if the committee wants to come up with a timeline of how long to leave that open, and we could certainly do that.
That's great. I'm thinking of something like a couple of weeks, but I don't want to rush. And I think when we hear the public comment, at the end of the public comment, I think we should come back and revisit the timeline and the doable, if that's all right. Because I think we're going to find lots. So thank you very much, Josh. Thanks to everybody. I think we should open up to public comment and hear what folks have to say about our thinking. Also, I would especially welcome any input and questions from people that might be interested in bidding on this. And I have talked to a few practitioners and folks at the university about the possibility. So certainly if there were any questions from possible researchers, we would entertain those. We could just throw it in the mix as terms of the public comment, because rather than trying to sort them out, what's up front and what's not. So can we put both together, kind of have general public comment and any questions from possible researchers at the same time? Is that okay with everybody? Okay, let's just do that. So let's open it up to public comment. And if you're a researcher, get in the public comment queue and talk to us about your thoughts. Oh, and one more thing though, I know the Department of Revenue's been following and they're going to help us. And I don't know if they wanted to make any comments before we go to public comment. I didn't mean to put you on the spot, but Josh, if they wish to weigh in and they contact you raising their hand or anything, we would certainly hear from them. There's Mr. Fanning. Let's hear from Mr. Fanning first.
Hello, good afternoon there, Mr. Chairman.
Good afternoon, Mr. Fanning. General
Members
Fanning.
of the members of the committee, Brett Fanning. I'm the excise tax administrator here at the Department of Revenue. No initial thoughts on the bill proposals. That's not the intention of my comments here. It was just a couple housekeeping items in listening with the discussion here. So the first one relates to kind of the distribution piece of both parts of the bill, primarily with House Bill 200. So in the sales tax world, there's really two pieces of this sales tax distribution piece. What happens is the sales tax is compiled all together for all the sales tax that is submitted to us by county. And then once we get it at that county level, then it goes to the population portion of it. So with this particular proposal with the distribution piece, we're kind of missing that first part of how do we get the tax allocated to the correct counties as a replacement for the electricity on the sales tax that was lost. It also goes to a second piece that came up in the discussion. So we do have all the figures for all of the utility providers that are selling electricity here into the state of Wyoming. We've got that figures. They report gross sales to us, deductions, net taxable sales. They only have to break out the taxable sales by county. When they report to us, it is just one big line item for deductions. So we would not know how to source that to kind of make those counties equal, as was discussed a little earlier. So just something to keep in mind is that when counties have either non-taxable or exempt sales, they don't have to tell us where those were actually made. It's just a non-taxable figure. They only have to tell us where they collected the tax from so we can shoot off those correct taxes to the right entities. So something to consider there, Mr. Chairman. I kind of have one other point and then
Okay. On your first point, Mr. Fanning, can you conceive of a way that we would direct the taxpayer to make a report of if we were to go down that road that we could use the data for?
Mr. Chairman, I think that's completely possible, and that'd be up to legislative direction as well. But yes, that would be an option. Just as of right now, we don't have that data for you.
Okay. And then go ahead with your second point, unless anybody else on the first point? Go ahead, Mr. Fanning.
Okay. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Second point is related to, are we going to charge the full 6% if it's Albany County versus Laramie County versus Natrona County versus Park County, which is 4, 5, and 6? Generally, as a member of the streamlined sales tax agreement, you've generally, if it's taxable, it's kind of got to be all or nothing. There are kind of some exceptions to that rule, but in the most basic of terms, when I was working with LSO for those fiscal notes, it's generally kind of this all or nothing piece. Now, once the state gets all of the money, then the state, per the legislature, can distribute it however it wants. But generally, it's got to come in to us all in one place at the rate that's in effect.
And so, Mr. Fanning, let me ask about that a little bit. One purpose of streamlined sales tax is to recognize that we have vendors that aren't in Wyoming that have to respect our tax system, and we have to get distributions in conformance with that. In the electricity world, you don't have like a remote seller of electricity. You wouldn't have an Amazon selling electricity that comes in the mail. So it strikes me that the requirements of the streamlined sales tax to have this uniformity in treatment nationwide wouldn't necessarily come to play because there isn't a nationwide. You're physically connected to receive the electricity sale. Do you understand what I'm trying to say, Mr. Fanning?
Mr. Chairman, yes, absolutely. And it's definitely something I can research for you to get clarification.
Okay. Chairman Burkhart.
Mr. Chairman, thank you. So, Mr. Fanning, to put this in a question, power companies in Wyoming, people don't realize, a lot of people don't realize, import electricity. They bring it in from other states. In fact, there are times we're actually buying electricity from California due to the price versus generation here. Would those imported watts be taxable as sales tax? I'm having difficulty coming up with my question, but I know how would the imported electricity be handled?
So before you answer, Mr. Fanning, I might point out that, if Rocky Mountain Power were to draw on the hydro resources in the Northwest and that power comes into Wyoming and they sell the power, we still impose the sales tax now. That would be irregardless of where the power comes from. And I just throw that out there. But Mr. Fanning, if you can.
Mr. Chairman, Representative Burkhart, yes, absolutely. I think Chairman Case has outlined that well. Yes, if that electricity did get imported into the state of Wyoming, there would be an applicable sales tax there. The scenario that I see unfolding in that case is that, okay, you're going to import electricity into the state of Wyoming. There's generally going to be a wholesale for resale exemption there until it's sold to the end consumer, which is likely going to be in Wyoming, but could potentially be elsewhere as well, dependent upon economic factors.
So far, we've talked about utility sales. What about non-utility sales? Like in the case of the large solar farm that's going to go in south of Cheyenne, our understanding is that that is going to provide green energy for data centers. How that green energy gets from the solar farm to the data center, I assume Black Hills Energy would be helping with that. And whether Black Hills is just facilitating the transfer of the energy or whether they buy it and resell it. There would be a taxable event at some level, but the taxpayers could be two different people, and that will be complicating.
Mr. Chairman, yes, absolutely. It brought up Mr. Chairman, I did bring up a question. So when we were working on these fiscal notes with LSO, it related to the exemptions where the exempt in sales tax on electricity. It's worth noting we do have several exemptions on sales tax right now. And so it's important when I was looking at the fiscal notes for some of the draft bills from the last legislature, it looks like upwards of 37% of the electricity is already exempted. And that was from data that we found on returns from companies submitted to us. So it is worth noting there are already sizable exemptions. And so depending upon how that shapes out, it's worth noting going forward.
Do you recall what the largest exemptions were? Was it nonprofits or intermediate product, or what were the exemptions?
Yeah, Mr. Chairman, when I was looking at those exemptions in this specific realm, sales tax of electricity, generally it's going to be we have an exemption to manufacturers, processors, and in the ag industry. Definitely one. Now, remember, it's tough for me just looking at returns to note who they are giving the exemptions to, but certainly that's a player, as well as some other exemptions that I can see in the field as well.
Complicated. Thank you, Mr. Fanning. That's very helpful. And that helps our potential bidders too. Thank you, sir. Anything else from you, Mr. Fanning?
The last thing is Director Henson sends her apologies. She was not able to be here. She had some other commitments as the Director of Revenue. So thank you, Mr. Chairman.
My understanding, she's investigating the solar potential of Phoenix, Arizona right now as part of a conference, if I understand right. So we wish her the best. Thank you very much. You're the only one from the agency then, right?
Mr. Chairman, yes, sir.
Okay, well, stand by and listen. We're going to open it up to public comment now. So let's go ahead and do that and to start taking public comment. We do want to hear from people that might have possible questions as potential bidders as part of that as well. Let's go ahead. What do you got?
Mr. Chairman, this is Katie. There are several people in the room, and I don't know how many of them may or may not be interested, but if they'd like to maybe start filling seats at the table. And then we
I
have
did
several
see-
people online.
Okay. Well, let's, online, get ready. Who would like to go from the room? Go ahead, please take a chair. Go ahead, welcome, introduce yourself, and go ahead.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman. Can you hear me all right?
Yes, certainly we can.
Thank you. I'm not entirely sure where to look, but I'll go for Mr. Burkhart, Representative Burkhart here.
I think that's perfect.
Okay, thank you. Good afternoon, Mr. Chairman and members of this subcommittee. Thank you for the opportunity to speak here today. My name is Abby Brigerman. I'm an attorney at Holland and Hart. I represent the Wyoming Industrial Energy Consumers, or WIAC. WIAC, as many of you know, is an unincorporated association of approximately 20 large industrial consumers, all of whom take electric service from Rocky Mountain Power in Wyoming. Collectively, WIAC members represent over half of Rocky Mountain Power's Wyoming load. They are major producers of natural gas, oil, trona, soda ash, phosphates, and sulfuric acid. WIAC members employ thousands of people in Wyoming and make up a sizable percentage of Wyoming's economy in terms of both jobs created and taxes paid. Employees of WIAC members work in most of the state's counties. WIAC has been in existence for nearly 30 years and actively participates in proceedings before the Public Service Commission. WIAC's goal is to keep the cost of electricity low while ensuring service is reliable. For WIAC members, the cost of electricity is one of the most significant, if not the most significant cost of doing business in Wyoming. A WIAC member's monthly electric bill can be in the millions of dollars. Low electricity bills are vital to the health of WIAC members' businesses and also critically important for the state of Wyoming to be able to compete for business. I think I will make my comments short today. I think the discussion today regarding a tax posed solely on other states is well taken, both under the Constitution and the multi-state protocol. We do not believe it would stand, and it likely wouldn't be imposed solely on Wyoming ratepayers. But a uniform tax is still very concerning, and WIAC strongly opposes it. Right now, Rocky Mountain Power's Wyoming ratepayers are facing extraordinary pressure in their electric rates. They have absorbed a roughly 5.5% rate increase on January 1st. They are facing 2 rate increases totaling, for the average ratepayer, 16.5%, effective July 1st. Rocky Mountain Power is set to file another general rate case soon. Those rates will go into effect in 2025. And Rocky Mountain Power just appealed last Friday the results of the 2023 general rate case, making another rate increase possible. Adding to this burden right now would harm businesses, it would harm residential ratepayers, and in particular, it would harm the state's most vulnerable who are struggling to buy groceries. This outcome benefits no one, and I urge this subcommittee to not go forward any further on this type of legislation. As I promised, I'd keep my comments short. I'm available to answer any questions you may have.
Mr. Chairman.
Okay. Representative Burkhart.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. So one thing I don't understand is we've talked about eliminating a let's call it 4% sales tax and replacing it with and I'm doing rounding here, a 2% generation tax. So the WIAC members would rather pay 4% than 2%? Is that what I'm hearing?
Mr. Chairman?
I'll tell you what, if you guys wouldn't mind, Representative Burkhart, would you just handle the in-person comments there and just run the committee from there and then keep me from having to be the guy on the wall? Go ahead. And so I'll yield to Representative Burkhart, who had a question.
Okay, please proceed.
Thank you, Representative Burkhart. WIAC members oppose any tax increase, of course. We're speaking to an increase that would be imposed solely on other states, a structure like that with a credit to Wyoming ratepayers. We don't think that that would be workable. We think under the multi-state protocol that it would likely be imposed solely on Wyoming ratepayers. And we think a uniform tax, of course, we would oppose that, one that is imposed on all the states. Of course, we would oppose that. We think that the timing for a tax increase is really not good right now when it comes to electric utility rates.
So thank you, Mr. Chairman. So I guess I'm confused. The discussion here has been eliminating one tax and replacing it with a lower tax. And what I'm hearing is the industrial users prefer a higher tax. Am I correct?
No, Representative Burkhart, sorry, no, to be very clear, WIAC does not support a higher tax. I would just want to be very clear on that. If I have a misunderstanding of the tax structure that's now being considered, we've been talking about several different tax structures today. I have a misunderstanding of the tax structure that's currently being considered. I apologize for the confusion, but we do not support a higher tax of any kind.
Okay, all right, thank you. Mr. Chairman, back to you.
Representative Burkhart, would you just handle the meeting with those?
Okay, from those here in the audience?
Yeah, and then I'll
Okay.
pick it back when we go online. I really would
Okay.
appreciate that. It'd be smoother for everybody. Go ahead.
All right, so, Mr. Chairman, I must tell you and the rest of the committee, I need to leave at 2 o'clock for another meeting. So I'll do it until then. Okay. Proceed if you have anything else.
No, if there are no
Okay.
other questions, I'm happy to
Any other
step down.
questions? Nope. Okay, thank you.
Thank you.
Good afternoon.
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, I'm Jeremiah Riemann here on behalf of the Wyoming County Commissioners Association. I want to express my appreciation to Chairman Burkhart for including me in the discussion about House Bill 200 in particular. It does sound as if the committee is going to thoroughly examine the tax structure, the potential benefits, as well as perhaps harms to local government funding. And I appreciate that. It's a key component of this consideration that's been brought up by many here, including the good senator from Laramie, from Albany County. As you all know, the wind energy production distribution is 60% to the county where the production happens, 40% to the state. When you go with a different structure, all of those have different distribution mechanisms. Sales and use tax at the state level and local level involves the municipalities, of which they are not a part of that equation that I mentioned for wind energy production. It's not a bad thing. Perhaps they should be part of this equation as you consider this. But you also have other distribution methods when it comes to those local sales and use taxes. For example, the statewide sales and use tax first goes to the source of sales, second proportional to the population. As has been mentioned here, part of the distribution change would be able to take out that source of sale, and we've got to consider whether that's appropriate or not as part of the analysis. If you look at the local general purpose penny, that's distributed entirely proportional to population, doesn't include source of sale. And then if you go with the specific purpose, that's dictated by projects that are ultimately part of the equation. So I say all that to suggest that whatever we do with this request for proposals, we just encourage that you include a thorough analysis of the pros and cons of these scenarios. And with that, Mr. Chairman, I'd stand for any questions.
Any questions? Okay, not seeing any. Thank you.
Mr. Chairman?
Oh, I'm sorry, Senator Office, I didn't see your hand up.
Oh, no worries. Mr. Raymond, I'm curious, based on that, consideration is one thing. We can certainly consider it. And the concern is always don't change anything at all because we want what we've got right now. And it's always that kind of, I've got mine approach to things, and if I end up getting slightly more or equal, I'm probably going to be happy with the plan. But if I get any less, it's going to be a problem. I think we're sensitive to that consideration, but I think what we would really like to understand is at a higher level what is good and what isn't good for implementation, for how counties receive their funding, differences in practices between types of taxes that might be preferable, and some of the other things that we're talking about. So I think we do understand that no individual county wants to lose a single cent, but at the same time, as we're trying to figure out what's going to work going forward, were there any themes that the counties have on, boy, we like this type of tax is better than this, we would want things done in a certain way? Anything that we can bring to this discussion, or as we're building an RFP, incorporated into it, that so that we're gaining analysis that might be useful to the counties to understand the implications?
Mr. Riemann?
Mr. Chairman, Senator Rothfuss, I'll certainly give that some additional thought and consideration. I don't know that we've had that conversation internal to the association specific to this scenario. What I wanted to suggest is that we're not afraid of the analysis. We want to see that analysis so we can understand better the implications of this particular approach. There may be counties that see considerable benefit from what you're considering here. Places that don't currently have electricity generation taxes being collected. Others may be harmed from that. I don't know what the cost benefit analysis might be for a carbon county where, say, you strip away the wind energy production tax and impose this as an alternative. I also think we need to understand what the implications are for sales and use tax for purchase of equipment and other things, and how that might play out for some counties in this specific realm. I'm thinking about the Laramie counties of the world where there's considerable amount of equipment being purchased right now. I will certainly give it some additional thought, and we will be a productive participant and try and lend our expertise in this specific area. I just wanted to suggest that, and Representative Burkhart, I think, would agree, when we sat down and talked about this, the data was the missing piece, and I don't have the capability within our association to gather that for you.
Thank you, appreciate it.
Okay, any other questions? Thank you, Mr. Riemann. I'm going to take a chairman's privilege here real quick to remind everyone here and everyone listening that what we are doing are studying the issue. No decisions have been made, and in fact, the final result may be to not make any changes. So nothing has been decided. Just want everybody to understand that we're considering the bills that were handled. But I hope I didn't step on the good chairman of corporations' toes on that one, but just to know this is a study. Okay, anyone else in the room? Last chance, come on up. As people in my committee meetings know, if you hesitate, you're done.
I was
Proceed.
jumping right up there, Mr. Chairman, especially knowing that you're under such a compressed time constraint. So I will keep my comments very, very short. Thank you for the opportunity to speak to you today, Mr. Chairman. My name is Cindy Delancey, and I'm here on behalf of American Clean Power. So the comments that I'd like to offer, full well knowing that we are in the study mode and that the task force is looking at options and looking at the law, looking at the economics, that, it's going to be interesting to see how the study evolves. But just really wanted to throw out just some basic kind of principles as we're thinking about studying that I asked that the subcommittee consider. That, it appears from listening from past conversations, current conversations, that the goal of looking at a generation tax or exploring the notion of the feasibility of a generation tax is to raise revenue for the state of Wyoming for the future. And if history has taught us anything, that the best way to grow revenue is to grow production. That is, make the pie bigger instead of taking a larger slice of the pie. So no matter what taxes that it is that we are discussing, whether it's sales tax, generation tax, any other form of mixture of taxation, good tax policy is that, we should always try to understand if the tax will limit or destroy growth. So having said that, creating a generation tax or the contemplation of a generation tax is essentially making the slice larger and the rest of the pie smaller. As projects that are operating on a small margin and a low return, will have no choice but to maybe look at building those projects in other places that don't have this kind of tax policy or generation tax, potentially, if that's what the, ultimately ends up being imposed. Projects that would otherwise potentially pay substantial taxes in Wyoming under our current tax structure would never be built. And then the increased taxes actually transcend to be a decrease in revenue. So I just kind of throw that out there as the committee contemplates and develops this RFP and moves the study forward, that at this point, we look forward to following the study and learning more. But just wanted to put that out there, some general principles. Thank you.
Thank you. Any questions? Questions? Okay, thank you. Anyone else in the room?
Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, Representative Burkhart, my name is Richard Garrett, and I'm just going to speak to you today, if you'll allow me, as an individual, a ratepayer, as we all are probably, for electricity and its benefits in the state of Wyoming. A few days ago, my wife brought to me our electric bill and asked me to explain it to her, and it was very difficult to do so. Lots of acronyms and charges for generation and transmission and delivery and all those sorts of things. I think it would be very helpful to ask a consultant to include an analysis of how this very complex topic might impact an individual ratepayer. I'd be happy to provide you, but I know you already have your own, a copy of my electric bill to allow that consultant to analyze what impact, if any, it might have on our rates. I know this committee heard 2 weeks ago in Lander all of the things that are impacting folks and their pocketbooks in the state of Wyoming. If this has the potential to increase costs to individual ratepayers, and it's a study, so who knows if that will happen or not. But if that ends up being the case, I'm sure constituents will very much like to hear about that. So that's my perspective, and I appreciate the chance to offer it, Mr.
Thank you, Mr. Garrett. Any questions? Any questions? Nope. Okay, thank you. Anyone else in the room? Last chance. Okay, Senator Case, Chairman Case, I'll turn it back over to you for the remote testimony, and I apologize, I do have another meeting that I think I'm late for. They'll just have to wait on me.
Well, thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and we appreciate you coming, and go have your meeting. Thank you. You've been great.
Thank you.
Very good to have you there. It's just a little easier than trying me to do it. So let's go online. Who would be next online? Katie?
Mr. Chairman, if they can just raise their hands, that would be great. I see Chris Brown now.
Let's go to Mr. Brown.
Mr. Chairman and members of the subcommittee, thank you very much. Chris Brown, representing Powering Up Wyoming. We support renewable energy alongside our legacy industries as part of the all of the above energy strategy. Mr. Chairman, in understanding that we're early in the process, my comments rather will be very brief. I just want to respectfully request the committee proceed with caution. Predictability and stability are obviously critical components when industry is choosing where to invest, and renewable investments in a number of counties across Wyoming have benefited local and the state government through the sales, property, and the generation tax that WIN specifically already pays. I believe, Mr. Chairman, it was 2019 in the last economic study that Dr. Rob Godby at the University of Wyoming put out that did illustrate that Wyoming already was less competitive from a cost perspective than several of our surrounding states. And Mr. Chairman, anecdotally, conversations I've had with developers on a number of occasions, have indicated that investments have gone to neighboring states in some other instances, just based on the cost difference of pennies per megawatt hour. So again, I realize we're not speaking to a specific bill or a specific anything quite yet, but just wanted to A, say thank you very much for the opportunity to participate, and B, just urge the committee to use caution as Wyoming is seeing a good amount of investment, and we hope to continue to see that.
Thank you very much, Mr. Brown. Are there questions for Mr. Brown? Senator Rothfuss.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Mr. Brown, thanks for joining us and weighing in. One thing similar to what I asked before, I know it makes a difference what type of tax and when the tax is applied, even if it's the same dollar value to industry, right? We've had these conversations before. I think those are important things for us to understand better and to get the folks that you represent to honestly give us some of their opinions. And I understand, we all get that you all want lower taxes, right? We all know that, and we all know that you have to say that. But at the same time, we also know that if you're going to pay $100 in taxes, regardless of what tax system is in place, you actually do care how those $100 are paid. So I think it would be incredibly beneficial for us to understand that better too. And this is early, and this is where we're starting to do research. But from my perspective, those are the types of things I would really like to hear and understand from your industry. We get that you want it lower, but for a given amount, how would you want to pay that given amount? And what are the best structures that enable you to get investment, have cash flow, do all of the kinds of things that are business necessary? So getting to that next level is really useful to us, and everyone else can assume I'm going to ask the same question. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Mr. Brown, if you can.
Mr. Chairman and Senator Rothfuss, thanks very much for the question. With today being the first meeting, of course, I did not come prepared with a number of folks that we've brought forward and lengthy testimony. So your points are absolutely noted, and I will certainly speak with industry and make sure there are other folks here. Many in the industry have tax experts on staff that will be able to speak to some of the nuance that you're looking for, Senator Rothfuss. But again, predictability and stability are the constant two things I hear time and time again.
Great.
But your point is noted, and we will be prepared to speak to that in detail at a later meeting.
I appreciate it. Thanks, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, and thank you, Mr. Brown.
Thank
Who's
you, Mr.
next,
Chairman.
Katie?
Mr. Chairman, it looks like Kara Choquette, please.
Ms. Choquette, welcome.
Hey, thank you. Good morning. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, certainly can.
I should say good afternoon. Sorry. Mr. Chairman, members of the committee, my name is Kara Choquette, and I work for Power Company of Wyoming. We're working on developing and constructing what would be, if successful, the largest power plant in Wyoming. It's using the wholesale power model. If successful, according to a University of Wyoming model, our project would pay on average $50 million in property taxes, sales and use taxes, and generation taxes every year. We're a very significant property taxpayer. What I really wanted to talk about was I prepared public comment respecting item 3, the electricity landscape. So I wanted to offer the committee some background on what is the electricity landscape for Wyoming? Where are we as a state, as a producer and exporter of electricity compared to other states in the region, which was pointed out earlier, that's really who we are competing against. It's the states to the west and the 3 neighboring states to the east of North Dakota, South Dakota, Nebraska, that all encompass service territory served by power that's being delivered from Wyoming. We took a look at data from the U.S. Energy Information Administration as of the end of 2022. In short, Wyoming does not lead the pack in this very important non-mineral energy segment. So if you look at this cohort of 14 states as a situation analysis, as it will, Wyoming ranks 9th in the amount of total installed power plant capacity. This is less than Nevada, Nebraska, and New Mexico. Wyoming ranked 6th in the amount of electricity it produced, but that's followed very closely by North Dakota, Nevada, New Mexico, and Nebraska, all of which have a robust and growing power generation industry. EIA shows us that Wyoming ranked 14th or last in the amount of electricity that is produced by wholesale power generators. EIA data also shows this is the growing market segment of the electric utility space. And Wyoming was #1 in the amount of electricity export, but that is in part due to our very low population and low load. And as stated earlier, EIA data also shows that the percentage of electricity that is being bought from Wyoming or exported from Wyoming has been gradually declining. At peak in 1998, 71% of Wyoming's electricity was exported, and in 2022, it was just 59%. So if you look at the EIA Energy Atlas and all of the power plants that exist in the West, there are hundreds of power plants around Wyoming in other states located closer to the population centers that need that electricity. In contrast, though, EIA data shows there's only roughly 45 power plants in Wyoming selling electricity, excluding those that are cell phone generation or federal hydro. Those plants range in size from 1.5 megawatts to about 2,300 megawatts. So critically, our total installed power plant capacity has less than a 4% market share of all of the total capacity in those 14 states. The amount of electricity produced is similarly low. About 5.4% of all of the electricity generated in these states comes from Wyoming. So I would just encourage in the study that we really consider how tax policy should be based on site-specific considerations, including local load, including how much of demand is in state and how far it is for Wyoming to get power to external markets, and that has a cost. So for an electricity product to be selected by customers in other states, Wyoming power plants like ours need to be able to generate and deliver electricity to long-distance export markets at a cost that can compete with those power plants being built locally. If electricity made in and delivered from Wyoming is too expensive, it just won't get picked. And if Wyoming doesn't keep a viable and competitive export market, Wyoming risks not keeping those 45 power plants or gaining new ones, which in turn will bring new sources of property tax revenue, sales tax revenue, and jobs from a non-mineral perspective. It will help boost that non-mineral tax base and reduce the reliance on our minerals producers. So we just urge this committee to take those issues into consideration. Don't risk the loss of these good non-mineral property taxes and jobs. And just briefly, I want to mention our project was mentioned earlier at the start of this conversation by name. I just want to point out that our project, again, is one of the largest property taxpayers in Wyoming due to its size and scale. Already, we are the 40th largest non-mineral taxpayer if you take the list of all the department assessed state assessed public utilities, and then you add in the independent power producer electric utilities, we would already be the 40th such largest such taxpayer, even at this early stage of construction. Also, our project has very little land use. The total estimated footprint for the project is less than 1,400 acres. It's a very efficient use of land for the size of the project we're contemplating, which is over 3,500 megawatts. And with that, I'd be happy to take any questions either today or over the course of the summer as you examine these very important issues.
Thank you so much. Any questions from the committee? Senator Rothfuss.
Mr. Chairman, and Carol, I'll just kind of ask the same question and not expect a detailed answer, but for the future, kind of the same concept that I asked Mr. Brown of trying to explore and understand what structure of taxation works the best for you in industry We've had conversations before in the Minerals Committee about upfront cost versus ongoing cash flow cost as a good example of it. But if there's any more detail along those lines, that would be helpful.
Mr. Chairman?
Ms. Choquette?
Sure.
ahead.
Yes, thank you for the question. I think the power generation industry, and specifically in the renewables industry, has come to see after 10 years of things maintaining a relatively stable platform that the property taxes that are paid and the sales and use taxes are paid can be contemplated in the current models and the competition we see today. I know the University of Wyoming study that was mentioned earlier, which by the way also showed Wyoming of all the interior Western states has the highest totality of the taxes per megawatt hour. I would encourage the consultant to look at those 2016 and 2019 studies as well. Contemplated a gross receipts tax in replacement of the sales and use tax. The conversations that I have heard so far at the legislature have not contemplated the in place of equation. We are already under construction and already are paying sales taxes. So some of the horses are out of the barn there, as it were. And according to the Tax Foundation, a gross receipts tax, which is applied at that intermediate stage of production, is called the most economically damaging tax. A sales tax, however, that's broad-based and fair and applied to a broad base is deemed as a better tax applied at the point of consumption. So we, for our project, have already, to your point earlier, we are not asking for a tax decrease. We have simply been asking for taxes to stay at the current level of the property taxes, the sales and use taxes, and the generation taxes that are currently contemplated.
Thank you. Anything else from anybody? Thank you, Ms. Choquette. Who's next, Katie?
Travis McNiven, Mr. Chairman.
Mr. McNiven.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Travis McNiven on behalf of Basin Electric and also with the Wyoming Rural Co-ops. Mr. Sean Taylor is unable to join and asked me to pass on a couple of short remarks, if I may.
Go ahead.
I will. Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I will begin by answering Senator Rothfuss's question first, and duly note that I will, of course, pass on that tax change policy timing question that he has articulated to some of the tax attorneys and such at Basin. Following up with that, one question and maybe two suggestions for the economic analysis RFP that the committee is considering. The one question that Mr. Taylor asked me to ask, one of the questions that he asked me to ask was, does this or would this apply, again, recognizing this is the early stage, to the discussion that's going on in the state, of course, around third-party generation. Behind the meter third-party generation, should or would they be captured in this discussion or this model that is being contemplated by the committee? And so I will just leave that as a question out there for consideration. The other question that he shared with me, similar to what maybe Mr. Garrett already mentioned, just being the economic analysis that may or may not have, that could be done related to the members, the co-op members, and the being held, I'll say, financially harmless in that economic analysis and the rates that they're paying. Again, a somewhat similar concept to what Mr. Garrett already mentioned, and so I will not say any more there. The final thing there, of course, is from Basin's perspective, again, maybe in this economic analysis, again, at this early study stage, that, on the whole, Wyoming is an energy exporter of the various, neutrons that have been discussed, and as such, being an energy exporter, would that economic analysis consider or look at, would Wyoming, how or would Wyoming lose a competitive advantage, or just have some sort of, would Wyoming Power, regardless of source, be deemed less attractive to out-of-state markets as an energy exporter. A question perhaps for that economic analysis. And so with that, Mr. Chairman, certainly happy to take any questions, but we'll eagerly look forward to the study and the next steps that your committee may take.
Thank you very much, Mr. McNiven. Any questions for Mr. McNiven? You raised some good questions. Third-party generation had come to my mind as well. So don't have the answer there, but thank you very much. And we'll keep it on the table.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
All the best. Who's next, Katie?
Mr. Chairman, we have Chris Mickey.
Mr. Mickey, please.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. Are you guys able to hear me okay?
Certainly can, sir. Very clear.
Great, thank you. My name is Chris Mickey. I'm with the Wyoming Business Alliance, and it was good to see my former partner in crime there testifying. So I appreciate the opportunity. Here at the Wyoming Business Alliance, we believe that all business makes Wyoming better. And our guiding principles state that we support public policy and legislation that enhances a sound business environment and also promotes economic diversification. We don't support adding regulatory barriers or any additional burdens on businesses in Wyoming, as well as we support a broad tax base with certainty and clarity of current and future tax structures for all our Wyoming industries. It's with these principles in mind that we did oppose the bills that were put forth last year. As was stated earlier, we're already currently seeing really good investment with many large electric generation projects underway or slated to be built in the near future. And we want to make sure that Wyoming continues to maintain a competitive business environment that grows and diversifies our entire economy. As the demand for electricity countrywide is growing very quickly, it's forecasted to be doubling in the next 25 years, which is insane. This means that adding more energy projects is aligned with an all of the above energy strategy and helps our entire state. With this in mind, we look forward to ensuring that Wyoming produce energy will keep our country's lights on. We appreciate the committee's willingness to take a deep dive into this, and we look forward to seeing what the study has in store for us. So with that, Mr. Chairman, I'll succeed my time to you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Mickey. Any questions for Mr. Mickey? Not seeing any, sir. Thank you very much. Who's next, Katie?
Mr. Chairman, Bob McLaren.
Mr. McLaren, welcome. Mr. McLaren? You're on mute if you're trying to talk. There you go.
Okay. All right. Sorry, Mr. Chairman. Still getting used to this technology up here in Jackson.
I understand. This is all brand new to you up there in Jackson.
Yeah, right. So we, just like the County Commissioners Association, we get revenue from sales tax on this electricity. So we are concerned that we don't lose additional revenue or or made whole, if you will. Happy to work with you and the counties to understand the impacts of this. I appreciate what you're trying to do. I understand that it's early in the process, but if this is going to occur, we need to make sure that we're kept whole in one way, shape, or form. We don't want to repeat what happened with the food tax a number of years ago. So, but happy to work with you and the committee, and really appreciate what you're trying to do. Be happy to try to answer any questions, sir. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Questions for Mr. McLaren? Any questions? Mr. McLaren, I was around when we did that food tax thing, and I never understood how we could backfill that because we just never had the data to do that, and everything changed. But it makes sense to me that we can continue to order taxpayers to provide us the information that they also already have to provide the numerous sources. It's not new generation of information, because they're either regulated or they provide reports to the federal authorities, so that we ought to be able to know something about the sales and the foregone sales if the sales tax moves off the table. On the other hand, as Senator Rothfuss kind of looks at it differently, we kind of leave the sales tax on and have a matching tax. So I don't know where this is going to go, but I do remember very much the food tax discussion. This one, I think we very much can collect the right data to make it right with everybody. And we're thinking about it ahead of time. So
Thank you, sir.
Mr. Chairman,
appreciate Senator Rothfuss.
just on that point, I guess the one consideration about whether you replace it or whether you match it, only one of those can be argued to be unconstitutional at the same time, right? Because either you have a uniform tax by taking away sales tax and replacing it with a uniform tax, or you take sales tax and you add uniformity. If anyone argues against that, they have to pick one side and say it's the wrong way, and then they'd be hard pressed to argue against the other one.
Well, remember the big law firms work by the hour, Senator Rothfuss. So
absolutely, everybody wins, right?
Mr. McLaren's not a lawyer, but Mr. McLaren, you're certainly welcome to take a stab at that.
I think I'll pass on that one.
Thank you, sir. That was a wise move. Anybody else for Mr. McLaren? Thank you, sir. Is there anybody else, Katie, that would like to testify?
Mr. Chairman, there are no additional hands up in the room or online.
Okay, well, back to our schedule. If in the public testimony, is there anything that causes to change the idea of having a SharePoint process in the next couple of weeks to try to formulate a document that we can get back together about to talk about? We still think that works? Staff, do you have any concerns? Is there anything I'm missing?
I don't think so, Mr. Chairman.
Okay. With that, if there's any last thoughts the committee has, I think that would be our operable plan. Try to get together and we'll probably try to schedule a next meeting. If you want to try to tackle that now, it'd probably be in a couple weeks. So we say 3 weeks just to make sure we have time. That puts us roughly, say the second week in July. Is that all right? Or do we want to try to do it? Josh, do you have a calendar?
June, Mr.
handy?
Chairman, second week of June.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. That's wishful thinking. Second week of June, maybe towards the end of that first week. I think the Friday there's a 14th. That would be our goal to maybe get back together again. Let's hope it's a briefer meeting because we'll just be working off the document. We will, of course, take public comment and make our work available to everybody. But I don't think we need to really revisit all the preparatory ground that we've already done.
Mm-hmm.
And it would be exclusively by Zoom, but if somebody wants to go to Cheyenne, I think that's some sense more workable and workable for the public. Can we check a possibility around the 14th of June? Or a couple of days on either side for the conflicts that people might have? 14th is the best. Did I hear that?
It looks, at least on the legislative website, like the 14th is open. The rest of that week looks fairly full.
Could we grab the 10 o'clock slots so that we're not straddling the, well, let's wait till Representative Harshman. Let's wait to hear from him when he can participate. I know he kind of wanted that 11:30 slot. And it
I think
works.
he should be out of school by then, Mr. Chairman.
But he's been a very bad boy, and I think he's going to have to stay over.
Summer school?
Do
Okay.
summer school.
That happens.
That's absolutely true. It may not be a constraint. So, but let us explore that, and we'll get back with a posted time on that. Okay. You guys, everybody's been great, and thank you very much, and really appreciate everybody's thoughts on this. And thank you. We'll see you later.
Thanks, Mr. Chairman. Good to see y'all. Take care.
Take care.